What did you do with Lord Evander? Lord Evander gave me another blistering glare.
I will check in with you tomorrow morning. See to it, said the Mage Lord.
The door closed. Wow, we're practically BFFs now. Vance turned away from the door.
I've sent people to watch and make sure Lord Evander keeps his word.
Yeah, I sighed. I need to check in with Isabel. Our flat's warded, and so's the Coven's place. I know we can't protect everyone, but I didn't even hurt Calder. I'm not sure I can. And I don't believe for a moment that Calder will stop with dead humans and half-bloods. There are all kinds of nasty monsters he might be planning to resurrect himself as. Like a troll.
I doubt his plans are that sophisticated,
said Vance.
As for what Lord Evander said, I feel like we're missing something. I did check the ley line myself, but it's by no means the only possible place Calder could hide.
There are other key points, I said. Maybe. We reached the stairs. I managed one step before collapsing onto Vance. My legs had gone numb again.
Want me to carry you?
I'm fine, I said through chattering teeth. Healing spell worked like a charm.
Your lips are blue.
You didn't have a problem with my lips when I was kissing you.
At least sit by the fire if you're going to be obstinate.
He let me keep my dignity and walk for a bit before transporting us upstairs to his room. I sank gracelessly into the thick, warm carpet beside the fireplace. Bloody dead fairies, I mumbled into the soft expanse of whiteness.
You're actually going to sleep on the floor?
He sounded amused.
The bed's not 10 feet away. I can move us there without you having to open your eyes.
Don't you dare. I reached my hands towards the fire, seeking the heat. This carpet's thicker than my mattress back home, anyway. He laughed, a quiet rumble low in his throat, and sat next to me, his long legs stretching beside the fire. I let him pull my head into his lap, fingers trailing through my hair. By the way, thanks for telling Lady Granville that I'll be the one to kill Calder.
Of course.
He spoke like it wasn't a big deal, but it was.
Lady Granville might not understand the workings of necromancers, but she'll vouch for me to make the right decision for the people of the town.
Hope so, I murmured. Because Lady Harper said you'd choose the mages over me. She said I was your weak link. A pause.
You didn't actually believe that, did you?
Of course not. I lifted my head to look up at him.
Good.
He resumed stroking my hair.
Lady Harper has a habit of being blunt.
So do I. That's one of the reasons she said I'd never sit on the council. I stretched my neck as he applied himself to massaging my shoulders. Does that bother you?
No. It's up to you. I invited you to the council meetings because they directly impact your job. There's nothing in our rules preventing me from inviting in non-mages. Recent events accepted, I think we've handled the arrangement admirably.
You mean nobody's kicked me off the council yet? I said. Except the murder accusation. Oh, and if you forget the part where I failed to kill Calder. Double kill him. Whatever.
The accusation was unfounded.
Not surprising, though. I sighed. I know you're the Mage Lord and can overturn any law if you like. But the others, they don't want me there. I'm not a mage and never will be.
Laws can change,
said Vance.
And so can people. You've only been here a few months. Give it time.
Yeah. People can change. The two of us were an obvious example. The first time I came here, I was thrown out on the street.
What?
Vance frowned.
Who threw you out? When?
Years ago. when I came back from Faerie. I'd never told him, more out of pride than anything, and a desire to distance myself from the person I'd been back then. But Vance was close, and the fire was warm, and I didn't fear the past any longer. I ended up here and begged for help. The mages told me it was 10 years since the invasion, and that they weren't a charity. I slept out on the streets that night. Then I begged my way into the mercenary guild. Just about kept a roof over my head until I had the clout to ask to take on independent cases without people laughing in my face and calling me a kid. They still do sometimes, but I wave my sword at them and they shut up.
I'm sorry that happened to you, Ivy. I didn't know.
Vance's arms around me tightened.
I shouldn't have left you to fight Calder alone in death.
It wasn't your fault. Calder's a dick. Last I heard, he said, "I'll kill your mage first." I swallowed. This is the kind of danger I'm bringing. The council can't handle it, and I can hardly blame them when they can't see the enemy.
They're in no way blameless, said Vance. I'd rather re-elect the entire council from scratch and cut all ties with the necromancers than see the woman I love killed by their stupidity.
My breath caught. I'd have said, it was my decision to go after Calder. But all I could think was, I nearly lost this. I nearly lost him. When I'd nearly died saying the invocation, I'd retreated, terrified of putting Vance in danger by pursuing a relationship with him. Even now, some part of me held back, scared that loving someone that much would rebound on me, even as the wounds healed every time he looked at me like he saw the person I might have been if Faerie hadn't taken me. I leaned into him, craving his warmth and touch, and covered his mouth with mine. His breath caught in a low growl that did more to warm me than the fire did. I arched my body against his, wanting to feel him inside me and forget. The firelight cast warm patterns on his muscled shoulders and chest as he leaned over me, grey eyes bright with need as great as my own. Pleasure shuddered through my body as we moved in time with one another. I let my head fall back, let him love me, taking me to the edge and over. His scent wrapped around me, and for a while, there was just us and the warmth of the fire. Chapter 16. The path stretched out, grey and never-ending. Faerie. 2 figures floated in front of me, sadness etched on their faces. Ivy, don't go. Mum and Dad. I'm not going anywhere, I swear. I looked around. Why was I here? In death? Others floated ahead. The people I'd abandoned. They drifted in and out of my dreams, sometimes yelling accusations, sometimes just staring sadly. I didn't know which was worse.
Not all of us choose our paths, said Frank's voice.
I woke to the sound of wailing. With a groan, I rolled over, legs tangled in the sheets. Vance must have moved us to the bed at some point while I was sleeping. He wasn't here now. The wailing continued, shrill and insistent. Damn. The thin, high noise wasn't the emergency alarm, but something familiar. The banshee. I jumped to my feet, ran to the wardrobe and grabbed my spare clothes, tugging them on. Vance. Not him. Why hadn't he woken me when he'd left the room? Oh God. They'd got inside the manor. I shoved my feet into my boots and ran from the room, a firm grip on my sword. Its warning light glowed like a torch, reflecting off the white wallpaper in the landing and along the stairs as I leaped down 2 steps at a time. Once in the hall, I turned right, where the front door lay ajar. Vance! God, Not him, please. I hurtled outside, following the wailing noise, and ran into Wanda. Vance, where? He's okay. Ivy, someone attacked the necromancers. Lord Evander. He's dead. The wailing stopped. So did the world. I stared at Wanda a moment. Then my legs remembered how to move, and I ran along the front garden path. My eyes took in each detail. Injured mages lying on the grass. Healing spells and blood. Scared faces. But no threats on the inside. The walls must have held. Horrible snarling noises rang down from the street. I pelted along the path to the gates and out onto the road, in time to see Vance leap at the throat of a huge hellhound. His blades flashed out, held in clawed hands, and he brought the beast down in a single deadly strike. A second slash cleaved its neighbor's neck, sending its head flying. But no blood. Undead hellhounds? Shit on a stick! I saw an opening and ran behind him, where two more beasts approached, a meter away from the wards outside the manor. Ivy! Vance yelled my name, but I'd already whirled around to face my opponent. Undead hellhounds couldn't use glamour to sneak up on me. I whipped my blade out, disemboweling the creature in one move. The stench overwhelmed me, making my eyes water. Coughing, I narrowly avoided falling under the jaws of a second enemy. One thrust to the neck, and power exploded from my sword, sending its head flying.
That's one way to handle it.
Vance stabbed downward at the first flailing hellhound. Its head flew to the side, and the blade reappeared in Vance's hand, covered in gristle but no blood. I shook bits of hellhound intestine off my sword, grimacing. Vance, why didn't you tell me you were fighting them? I spoke lightly to cover up the horrified numbness that had struck me with the news of Lord Evander's death.
I had less than 30 seconds warning. He had 2 of my people as hostages. The night guard walked into his trap.
Oh, God.
The guards were patrolling the road, he explained. I got a call from the necromancers. Lord Evander. Someone found his body a mile out of town. No one knows how he got there.
What? The world had gone batshit overnight. I slept through that.
You were flat out. I didn't know if the healing spell was enough.
I'm fine. As fine as possible when I'd just learned someone died horribly, anyway. Who even found Lord Evander?
2 of his apprentices with a tracking spell. He disappeared from the guild last night.
I took out my phone. I'll warn Isabel. We'll need those spare exterminators if we're going to take on the ghosts. Without the necromancers. Sure, Lord Evander wasn't particularly helpful, but we'd just come to an understanding. Now he was dead. My sword's blue light flared up. I finished my message and slipped my phone back into my pocket. My sword's reacting, I said warningly. That means there's a hostile Faerie coming this way. Vance didn't hesitate. He directed several other mages to join him, leaving me to take the lead. I followed the light of my sword to the street's corner. The same place Ralph had died. For an instant, the world turned grey, like the veil. A path stretching across the road and out of sight. Then I blinked and it was gone. The hellhounds had come out of the veil. The lines between the worlds were thinner than ever. And there were more on the way. If the veil was this bad, ghosts might be able to do as much damage as the undead. Cursing under my breath, I readied my sword. A hellhound appeared, its huge haunches bunched. Then it jumped. My blade sliced up, magic bursting from both sides, and the hound's head exploded across the pavement, scattering decaying bits of flesh. Another hellhound's head burst into flames. Drake directed the flames with his hands, forcing the other hellhounds to move away from their neighbour. I watched for a moment in sick fascination as the undead's flesh melted from its bones, the hellhound's protruding teeth still snapping in anger. I speared another one, sending a blast of magic through my blade that took the hellhound's legs out from underneath it. Another blast, and its head exploded into a grisly mess. The mages openly stared as I danced circles around the remaining beast. My blade opened wounds that would have incapacitated it if it hadn't been undead. One final blast of energy took care of it. The hellhound crumbled into disintegrating fragments. Vance pulled his own sword out of what was left of the hellhound Drake had set on fire. Lady Granville marched over, fury carved on her face. "What the devil is happening here?" I ignored her. "Did anyone see where they came from?" I squinted ahead, but the weird transparency of the veil had faded somewhat. There were still hints of it in places, though. Faint, smoke-like sections of air, like someone had placed a barely visible filter over the world. Either they'd hidden themselves within the veil itself, which I'd thought was impossible for anyone with a physical body, or they'd stepped directly out of the grey veil, as though the veil didn't exist. "No," said Lady Granville. "You have the sight, do you not?" "Yeah, but they didn't use glamour. They're undead." I raised my sword, showing her the relatively clean blade. "No blood." Lady Granville went pale. "Undead? Like the ones at the graveyard, the slewer." I almost took pity on her. "I'm going to contact my friend. She has necromantic equipment." "What are the necromancers doing? Do they have a stand-in leader?" "It happened too fast," said Lady Granville. "The necromancers are beside the point. We need to take action to protect the town." "Yeah, like you were involved in the fight." I hadn't even seen her appear until after the hellhounds were dead.
"If there are more undead, we already have barriers in place through the middle of town," said Vance.
"I think they're targeting the manor," I said. "And you. All of you."
"Then we'll hunt them down."
Drake conjured another flame in the palm of his hand.
"Absolutely not," said Lady Granville. "Assuming we can actually see our enemy, which we can't, this manor is a place of safety. I thought you, of all people, would realize, Lord Colton." "Oh, I'm aware," said Vance softly. "The enemy is already here."
"The manor is warded," said Lady Granville. "Not the rest of the town," I said. "Besides, ghosts can walk through wards. They've been running circles around you for weeks." Lady Granville turned on me. "Just what is your plan exactly?" "I'm going to hunt the ghost down. The necromancers will be panicking without their leader, so you'll probably have to fill in and stop hysterical people wandering right into the path of the ghosts. Send out a broadcast to everyone who has a radio. Whatever you usually do in an emergency." I'd never witnessed the majors handle an emergency before, because I'd always been at the center of the chaos with no time to take anything in. Lady Penrose was in charge of resetting the wards and sending out the message to the public, while the other majors divided into groups. Securing the town was all very well, but the number of ghosts, and undead, might be close to infinite. As was all too clear, the necromancers hadn't been careful enough about making sure they stayed dead. "We're already warning people not to leave their houses," said Lady Granville. "Didn't you let the ghost slip through your hands once already? Nobody else can fight it. Unless you have an exterminator handy, and it might not work now the veil's acting up. Besides, it isn't permanent. Did anyone else hear a banshee, by the way?" The majors looked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "Seriously," I said, "this is the second time I've heard creepy voices in the manor. Someone's screwing with us." My phone vibrated in my pocket. Oh, hell. What with nearly dying, I'd forgotten to check up on Ivy. There's a Faerie on our lawn. The wards are blocking it, but it won't go away. Damn it!
What is it?
Vance was at my side in an instant. Faerie, I said. At home. Possibly lethal.
Undead?
Can't tell. Vance nodded, and without another word, transported us into my front garden. And into the path of the Banshee. Talons rose to slash at us. I swung my blade at the target. Unbalanced from the landing, I missed. The Banshee drew back, hissing. What are you doing? You're sitting on my lawn, I snarled. Get off. Away.
Lying scum, said Vance. How many more people did you manipulate on Calder's orders?
Calder? No. I'm not.
No.
Give it up. My blade nicked the skin of her throat. Crimson blue blood dripped onto the frosty grass. You attacked us twice. Like we'd trust a word you say. You're the traitor, aren't you? I heard you at the manor. It is not I who intends you harm, growled the Banshee. You attacked us. On half-blood territory. Also, you weren't supposed to be guarding the jail in the first place, so that was an outright lie. I wished to warn you, Ivy Lane. That I'd die. Got that memo already. I pressed the blade as hard as possible without severing an artery. She made a noise of gurgling terror. Talons swished out, only to burn on contact with my sword. I tried to stop them getting out. You don't understand what he's planning. Do you know of the Wild Hunt? Only by hearsay, I said. It's where hellhounds come from originally. Let go of me, she said. I'm not lying. I knew Calder when he was alive. I can help.
Tell us everything, growled Vance.
As for me, I didn't relax my grip until her talons had retracted. I'm not the one you should be attacking. Someone just died, I said. I wouldn't push me. Were you the one who killed him, like you killed Ralph? I didn't kill anyone, she said. I came to the jail to warn you. You attacked us. I tried to scare you off. There were ghosts there, waiting for you. Why did you scream? I asked. Don't deny it, I heard you. Because today, one of you will die. Brilliant. My sword lit up in warning. I'm not the killer, she gasped. I can only sense the future. I can't change it. What do you want from us? You wouldn't hand over the information without expecting something in return. Like my soul or magic, for instance. You're distrusting, said the Banshee. I don't blame you, but I'm no villain. You killed Ralph, didn't you? I glared at her. You lured the guards away. Don't deny it, just like you did at the prison. A spirit lured them away. I'm no spirit or undead. The blood streaming from where my sword cut her neck proved that, at least. You could have used glamour or magic. I'm a shapeshifter. I can't use glamour. We don't have time for your lies. If you know how to stop the veil breaking open and Calder flooding the city with ghosts, tell us. If not, stay away unless you want my hand to slip.
Tell us who the traitor is, if not you.
Vance pointed his own blade at her, the air rippling as he used his displacing magic to hold her locked in place. There's a spirit, she whispered. The spirit was there in the building with you. It's still there.
You lie,
said Vance. I tried to warn you before, at the ball. The magic was yours. I took another step towards her. You tried to break through the wards. I wanted to get your attention. The fairy guard came instead. I had to disappear. That'd almost work as an excuse, I said. Except Ralph died the next day after someone knocked out the manor's other guards and lured him away from his post. Same person who lured away 3 necromancers, I'd bet, and sacrificed them to raise the undead. Necromancers? No. There was a spirit in the manor. It's been there more than once before. So you came to warn me of danger at the manor after nearly killing Vance and me on half-blood territory while pretending to be a prison guard out of the goodness of your heart. She blinked. No. No to what part? I'm going to need more specific details here. She swallowed. I warned you of your death. You didn't listen. I came to the manor when I realized the traitor was amongst you, but the anti-fairy wards kept me from moving any closer. How long did it take to think of that one? I shook my head. Give it up. It'll be easier for all of us if you tell us what you're really doing here. If you're thinking of attacking my flat, go right ahead. There are a dozen tripwire spells under your feet. I know. I passed 6 of them. They didn't recognize me as a threat. Vance and I exchanged glances. So you don't mean us immediate harm? That was usually as good as I got with the fairies. Fine then. Tell us what you know. Hey, Ivy! Isabel walked outside, armed with what looked like her entire spell collection. I take it she's not a villain? Quite possibly, I said. She has information. Do you still have the necromantic equipment and sensors? We'll need them. What's going on? Isabel demanded. I've tried messaging Colby, and there's been no response. Lord Evander's dead. There's ghosts swarming all over the place, and Calder's planning an attack. She promised to tell us what he's planning to do. Don't make another vow, Isabel said. You know what happened last time. She's half fairy. No need to. Anyway, get the necromancy gear and see if you can get hold of Colby. I have a feeling all hell's about to break loose.
It already has, Vance said. Tell us now, Banshee. I have my people to protect. You mentioned the Wild Hunt. The Hellhounds came from there.
On the rare occasion that war comes to Faerie and blood is spilled, the Wild Hunt come to collect the dead. There was a laugh in her voice. An old rumor is that the leader of the hunt is a true immortal. That is, he cannot be killed, even with iron. He can travel through all the realms, even death.
I gaped at her. Is that who Calder plans to call?
There were tales in unseelie territory of exiled lords whose power came from the darkest side of Faerie, she said thoughtfully. Just stories, I thought, until I learned of the strange events of last year. Someone promised immortality to the half-bloods. The same someone bore a striking resemblance to a lord who disappeared from summer territory. The source of the rumors. Velkas.
Tell us what Calder's plan is, Vance ordered her.
He didn't tell me, said the Banshee. The Wild Hunt are moving. His necromancy is calling them here.
Why?
Because the leader of the hunt is the god of death to the she. She smiled with a flash of white teeth. He can take a she from life, and they say he can return the dead to life, too.
Oh. I could hazard a guess how Calder planned to return to his body. Worse,
It confirmed my suspicion. The hellhounds hadn't been hiding with glamour. They'd come from over the veil. I knew what lurked over the other side. How many hounds? Tens of thousands. I swore. When? Now. Today. She shuddered away from my sword. He set his hounds upon me, you know. I barely escaped with my life. Your people kept me away from the manor. I hoped to find you here, Ivy. Isabel came out of the house. You look like you saw a Pisky, she finished, as Erwin flew out, screaming, Bad Faerie! He landed on the banshee's head, tearing at her hair. Get your Faerie away from me! She yelled. Erwin, no, I said. Protecting you! Screamed the Pisky. Oh, dear God. Isabel looked at me like I'd sprouted horns. What are you doing? We need to move, I said. Lord Evander's dead, the majors are in chaos, and we need to get back there ASAP. You can explain yourself to the council, I added to the banshee, who yelped as Erwin bit her fingers. I have the equipment, said Isabel. Tell me what we're facing, and I'll pass on word to the coven. She handed me an exterminator, which I passed to Vance with my free hand. I had two myself, in case my sword didn't work. Ghosts are more dangerous than undead, I told her. Use the exterminator. If the coven haven't already, tell them to block the roads. There's a swarm coming through town. I don't know where they'll strike. If they were anything like living fairies, they didn't care about collateral damage, especially if they came from the Grey Vale. We'll take her with us, I said to Vance, indicating the hissing banshee. Just in case. She can explain herself to the Mage Council. A whirl of motion later, and the three of us stood in front of the manor. Erwin, thankfully, was gone. The banshee hissed, wiping the blood from her fingers into her thick, dark hair. Lady Granville marched over. Where did you disappear to? This behavior is unacceptable. This half-blood warned us of an attack, Vance told her. She claims to know Calder's plan. The dead walk amongst us, and it's in your interest to accept what you cannot see with your own eyes. Is everyone accounted for? We're here, aside from the guards near the storeroom, said Drake. But she, he looked at Lady Granville, thinks we should stay behind. Also, Lord Carlisle isn't answering calls. What's that? Asked one of the council, pointing at the half-banshee. A possible lead, said Vance. Ivy, watch her. I'm going to make sure nothing happened to the majors I sent to watch the storerooms. Then we have to solve this conflict. My heart sank. I had the feeling Lady Granville had no intention of sending any majors against an enemy they couldn't see. People are missing? Majors? Lured away? Or dragged over to the enemy's side? We lost contact when we heard from Lord Evander, said Lady Granville. Some of us need to hold the fort here. We can't give up the manor to the despicable people who murdered one of our own. I'm not hiding like a coward while my people are missing, said Vance, the hint of a snarl in his voice. Watch the Faerie instead. She claims to be on our side and to know what Calder is planning. I can show you, the banshee said. I can show you where I met him. It's near Oak Tree Lane. I looked at Vance. 10 minutes. You check on your people. I'll watch her. I can kill her if she turns on me. It's a non-issue. The banshee flinched away from my sword. Yeah, I'm not very trusting. Get used to it. I was more worried for Vance's sake. Missing people, right after Lord Evander. Be careful, I said to Vance, and to the other mages. Vance dropped the banshee and me on the road side. The banshee immediately skipped down the street, and turned a corner, forcing me to run after her. She stopped outside a run-down apartment complex on a side road. Not one I'd been to. The area had the same aura of neglect as the mercenaries' place, except with a more obvious Fae presence. Vines snaked down from the roofs and claimed the more run-down buildings. Curtains of ivy grew, along with unrecognizable fairy plants, dull and leafless under the winter sky. So this was where my mortal enemy had grown up. Chapter 17. I looked around, recognizing my surroundings with some surprise. We were a few streets down from the major storerooms, at the edge of mage territory. This was one of many apartment complexes in a fenced-off area. Once they'd been serviceable flats, but the invasion had hit this part of town hard. The impoverished, and clearly half-fairies who didn't want to live on the chief's territory, had moved in. Calder lived here. I didn't know him well. His human mother died when he was young. I remember seeing him around. Nasty kid. A bully. I didn't doubt that. There were kids here, including a bunch of teenagers with horns and claws lurking under the overhang outside the largest block of flats. The banshee waved her talons at them when they started towards us, and they scuttled away into the bushes. So you live here, not on half-blood territory? I dislike rules. I heard you do too, and yet you're the mage lords. Girlfriend and assistant, I said. And I'm not here to talk about him. You seem to know an awful lot about Faerie for someone who's never been there. I told you I knew Calder. He used to talk about the she all the time. Now I know he spoke to one of them. It makes sense. Velkas never came here. Who? The she-lord who trained Calder. He used to walk between this realm and... You know what? I'm not giving you any more information than you already have. And we walked to the building in silence. All I knew of the wild hunt was that hellhounds who ended up in the dark side of Faerie were cast out. Summoning up any kind of higher fairy was foolish, but this hunt seemed a whole other issue. 10,000 hellhounds would crush everything in their path, and the resulting influx of spirits crossing the veil would be impossible for the necromancers to deal with without their leader. And God knew what other monstrosities would wake up in the interim. The image of a giant dragon flashed through my head. I'd trapped it in the grey veil, but there might be others. Hell, there must be. Nothing stayed dead, not as far as Faerie was concerned. I guess Calder didn't know, or didn't care, because he'd wake up more than ghosts if he continued on his insane quest to immortalize himself. Gleaming eyes watched us from the shadows as the banshee opened the front door to the apartment complex. So many kids, fending for themselves. No wonder Calder had turned to Velkas as soon as he'd had the chance. Question was, how had Velkas found him in the first place? Maybe his she-blood. He'd known he was part she, flaunted it even. He was a walking target. Before, I might have pitied him, like I had when he died. Now, I felt nothing but searing anger. I didn't need to know my enemy. I just needed to know how to beat him. We climbed the stairs to the first floor. The banshee skipped ahead, pushing open a door on the left. Inside was a room even dingier than the corridor. Bare floorboards, furniture barely functional. Only a bed and a bookshelf in the main room. Calder's man cave, I guessed. I didn't know what I'd expected. Curtains made from his enemies' corpses, maybe. There wasn't a weapon in sight, nor any sign of living presence. He had been dead for months. The kids raided his room, the banshee explained. So, how do you know I'll find anything? He kept secrets. Huh. I knew he'd borrowed necromantic props. This place looked abandoned, but then again, he hadn't been able to manifest in a physical form yet. Now the veil was opening. I wouldn't put anything past him. Glancing at the banshee, I threw a shield around myself and tossed a tracking spell onto the filthy floorboards. "There's no need to do that," the banshee said petulantly. "I'm not going to attack you." I always cover my back. I plunged my hands into the tracking spell. No sound, of course, and it was possible Calder had never made it here. But I had to be sure. The spell narrowed my vision, but he appeared before my eyes so suddenly that I stopped breathing. He walked. No, floated, towards the wall I faced. So he'd been here, but hadn't gained a physical body. As a powerful ghost, he'd need a particularly strong surge to gain presence, one that'd have drawn the necromancer's attention if he'd done so within reach of the guild. So he'd moved his plan elsewhere. I watched him move to the broken desk, crouching. A section of the wall moved, revealing a safe. Aha! I let the spell go and walked to the same spot of wall. Inside lay the safe, same as I'd seen in the vision. I gingerly touched it, the door swinging open. He hadn't cared about leaving evidence behind. Or maybe he hadn't been able to manifest in physical form long enough to close the safe. A copy of the Necromancer's Handbook greeted me, battered and worn. He'd turned the corners of several pages down, including the one with the map. The pages were faded, but he'd drawn onto it with a pen. Lines crisscrossed the map of the UK. Not just the ley line, but other lines too. At the top he'd written, "The spirit parts." Spirits have to be contained in a summoning circle, I muttered. Not. But that wasn't true. The ghosts had got out already. So had undead. Summoning circles were a safety measure. Calder didn't give a shit about safety. He wanted to summon the hellhounds to serve him, and without a summoning circle to contain them, they'd trample the whole town flat and leave devastation in their wake. Putting the circle aside, he'd still need a mass concentration of energy to bring the hunt here. If he couldn't manifest in physical form, he had to resort to acting through others. Lord Evander's death would have stirred up a ton of energy, but enough to bring a whole army? I looked back at the page. Of course, he hadn't marked the exact spot where he intended to strike. But there was more than one ley line. Everyone focused on the line over by Necromancer territory, because it was the one the she had broken through, but it was far from the only path into death. And that meant there's more than one line, aside from the main one, I muttered. Spirit lines, spirit paths. The wild hunt would come through one of them. He didn't need to summon them on the original ley line. A key point could involve any line, as long as two intersected. And if the map was right, the whole world was covered with hundreds of similar crisscrossing lines. How the hell was I supposed to find the one Calder had picked as the spot to summon the wild hunt? There might be 100 of them. The banshee's blank expression told me she didn't know what I'd just concluded. How would he go about summoning the hunt? I asked her. He's not summoning ghosts, he's summoning fairies, pure ones, right? Are the hunt pure fairies? She frowned. If you mean their blood is all fairy, then yes. If you mean they're alive, in some sense. What? You mean they're dead? Or half dead, half alive? The hunt wasn't restricted to one realm, which meant the fairies who were part of it must have some kind of spiritual form in order to pass through the veil. The hounds weren't living in the usual sense, though they could be killed. Life and death were a hell of a lot more complicated than it seemed on the surface. He got this book from the necromancers, I said slowly. But they don't know fairy summoning rituals. Hell, Velkos might not have, and I doubt he told Calder. He thought he was immortal before I killed him. So somehow Calder learned about the hunt from here on Earth. And so did you. I flashed her a suspicious look, and she recoiled from the power thrumming along my blade. I didn't know he'd do it, she whispered. That explained her motives then. Of course she'd helped him. I had some inkling what had happened. You worked with him? No. Calder visited each of us when he decided to recruit other half-bloods to his plan. He killed anyone who stood up to him. I managed to hide. You mean the drug? I didn't think he'd go through with it. When you killed him, I expected never to see him again. And when I saw his ghost, I knew he'd come back for you. He said so. I heard the spirits whispering. They're quiet now. They used to be everywhere. She waved her hands around. He spoke of his intention to summon the hunt. I don't know this ritual. I can only sense death, not control the dead. So he's planning a mass summoning, or sacrifice. Probably both, knowing Calder. Yet here a clue stared me in the face, and the squiggly lines on the page were entirely meaningless. Slowly, keeping one eye on the banshee, I typed out a message to Isabel, attaching a photograph of the map. Which line would a half-fairy wanting to summon up a flood of hellhounds pick as their key point? He must be near this town. Death was localized in that way, and he specifically wanted to target me. Part of this was about revenge, not just returning to life, which restricted the possible lines to the ones that passed through or near the city. A response from Isabel. He'd pick a place where at least 2 lines intersect. Didn't they find Lord Evander outside the city? I swore softly. Calder might have been leaving me a clue. Or a trap. Either way, Lord Evander was the most powerful necromancer in town. For all I knew, his death had been a sacrifice in a summoning ritual. But where? Isabel's next message. The place the witches call the Path of the Dead. 2 miles outside town, 3 lines intersect there. The Path of the Dead. Of course. Now do you believe me? The banshee leaned over me. Yeah, I do. Back off, I'm a little twitchy. My sword jumped in my hand, blue runes igniting along the edge. I took a breath. This key point wouldn't be as strong as the one where the invasion took place. It had never connected with Faerie the way the main line had. Only death. Unfortunately, the dead and fairies were pretty much allies now, and an intersection of 3 lines was just the place to stage a mass summoning. I turned to the banshee. I'm going back. A transparent figure stepped out of the wall, prompting a scream from the banshee. I instinctively backed up, grabbing my sword instead of covering my ears, though I was tempted to. Ivy, Ralph gasped. I have to warn you. There's a mage traitor. He's stealing from the stores. I gaped at him, his sudden appearance sending my heart into freefall. What? A mage is opening the stores where you put the talisman. The stores? Shit. Who? Impossible. The wards kept out hostile threats, and the only people able to access the stores were the 5 mage lords. A mage! He's taken! Ralph vanished with a yell. I stared after him. I told you there was a traitor, said the banshee. Don't, I snarled, my hand clenched around my sword. I was closer to the stores than I was to Vance. I'd have to get there first. The banshee grabbed my arm, and I reacted instinctively, pushing my magical shield between me and her. She was thrown across the room, and the floor trembled under my feet. "I wish to be on your side, Ivy," the banshee croaked. "You wield the power of a true she." "Yeah, save it," I said, no longer interested in anything she had to say. Isabel knew what was happening, but even Vance's teleporting ability couldn't bring an army halfway out in the countryside. No, we were running out of time. I grabbed the book and pelted downstairs, using every ounce of fairy-enhanced speed to propel myself out of the door. The half-fairy children stared as I ran out of the cul-de-sac and turned, looking for a familiar landmark. "I'll kill your mage first." But what if the traitor had been there with Vance and the others at the manor, right before I'd left? One of the mages had turned on the others. I'd left them setting up security measures around the whole town. Oh, God. My hand strayed toward the mage mark on my shoulder. He'd have called me if he needed my help. There was a traitor after the mage's stores. The talisman and the invocation were what Calder needed. I should have known. His own magic wasn't overpowered like Avocus's. No, he wanted the magic I'd taken from him, and the life drinker with its infinite strength. Neither could restore him to life, but his plans to raise the dead and summon the wild hunt must be well underway. I stopped at the street corner, my lungs burning, a stitch in my side. Sucking in a breath, I approached the storehouse. Energy radiated off my sword, warning any hostile fairies away. But they weren't the enemy I was after. Outside the doors, a man stood waiting. Lord Carlisle. He's possessed. "Get away from there," I told him. Was he dead? No way to tell at this point.
"It's nothing personal," he said. "I just needed the assistance of a necromancer."
"Who are you?" A half-fairy? For sure. Lord Carlisle's eyes flickered, but he didn't otherwise look or sound any different. Calder would have announced himself.
"It's too late."
He held up a piece of paper. An invocation. "You can't speak it," I said, but my heart sank.
"You can."
A pressure hit the back of my head. I gasped, my vision fracturing, as pain split my skull. He's trying to possess me. I wasn't a necromancer, but I had a connection to death. The pressure burned against my skull, flames licking the inside of my eyes. I yelled and struck out, drawing all the pain and agony into my blade. The blast of magic knocked him back, and I lunged forward, grabbing for the paper. The spirit yowled and struck at me. It was a half-fairy, one of many who'd served Calder. Nothing about him particularly stood out, but the icy chill that hit my hands told me he had winter magic. His eyes shone blue from his pointed, transparent face, mouth twisting in anger. He'd been possessing Lord Carlisle, maybe for weeks, sneaking directly into the manor to spy on us. "Go to hell," I told him.
"I'm already there, Ivy."
The pressure attacked my eyes again. I cursed and waved my sword around, willing my magic to strike him down. I couldn't disconnect from my body, not if I didn't want him to possess me for real. I had the magic of a she-lord. This dickhead wasn't even alive. I drew all my magic towards me. The blue shield covered me from head to toe, and then pushed outwards, like when I tried to knock Lady Harper's hold on me away. The pressure vanished, and the ghost reappeared, flying at me with hands outstretched. My sword came up in a blur of blue light. The spirit shattered in a rain of icy fragments. Cold pierced my limbs, and my hand trembled on the parchment. I looked down at it. Words leaped to life on my tongue, and I bit down hard enough to draw blood. I wouldn't speak aloud, Not when I was uncertain of whether the spell was about to come to life and call the wild hunt here. Did Calder plan this? He couldn't speak the invocation himself. I folded the paper with shaking hands, closing my eyes until the shakes stopped and the impulse to speak fled. Then I walked down the stone footpath to the storehouse. No trace remained of the Death Stealer, which lurked in the shadows near here, but I kept my weapon out, raising my left hand to push open the door. The front door opened, revealing the sparsely carpeted corridor, still littered with pieces of undead from the most recent battle here. Anything could walk inside, as long as it didn't have evil intent. The door to the invocation chamber was a different story. The wards pressed against me. I swore under my breath, "I'm not here to steal anything." I tentatively pushed on the door handle. My hand seared, like I'd placed it on a hot stove. Ow! Damn it, Vance. Sure, the wards worked, but that wasn't much use when one of the most dangerous invocations was stuck on the outside. Damn it to hell. I ran back out the building and dragged Lord Carlisle's unconscious body with me up the path. He was out cold, and didn't stir as he bumped over the doorstep and the uneven floor. I held my breath when his head knocked against the wall, but he didn't wake up. The paper in my hands glowed. I clamped my mouth shut and pushed the paper into Lord Carlisle's hand, and pressed the palm of his other hand against the door to the invocation chamber. The door opened. Again the wards pushed me back, but I dangled Lord Carlisle's hand over the entrance and shook him until the invocation fell to the ground. This wasn't ideal. It might be my stupidest idea yet, but the plan worked. The invocation was back in the chamber. I hauled Lord Carlisle back down the corridor, hoping no other ghosts were around. I didn't have time for this crap. Calder was out there, but I wouldn't give him the tools to make rising from death easier. Once I dragged Lord Carlisle over the entrance to the storeroom, I threw another iron ward down. This wasn't my best idea, but the ward kept out fairies. Nobody else could come in here and influence him. Footsteps came from behind me on the path. I spun around and swung my blade. Air smacked into me and I stopped. Vance! My arms dropped to my sides in relief. He'd appeared behind me, coat fluttering in the breeze.
Ivy, what?
Lord Carlisle. I indicated his unconscious body. He was possessed. The spirit killed Ralph. He was trying to steal an invocation. Where are the missing mages?
Back with us, but we've got another issue. Lady Granville is flat out refusing to send anyone to join you in Fight Calder.
I swore. Seriously? I know where he'll strike. I know what he's planning. Vance looked down at Lord Carlisle.
Where's the Banshee? She's not here, is she?
I scared her off. She's not working against us. At least, I don't think so. She fell for Calder's ruse before. With the drug. She told me his plan. I explained as quickly as I could. Calder might have failed to grab the invocation, but I had no doubt he'd made a backup plan. We needed to get to the key point and stop him.
Lord Carlisle,
said Vance when I'd finished.
He's been showing up over here near the stores, but I never thought one of them could get at a council member. It makes sense now. Possession is unreliable, more so than using a ghost or persuading a living person. We've had undead, fairies, all manner of attacks on the stores. None have succeeded. Don't count this as a victory yet, I said darkly. There's still Calder. He's operating from outside the town. Isabel said the most likely place is called the Path of the Dead, where 3 spirit lines intersect. If he calls the hunt there, they'll trample right through town. There are boundaries throughout the town, said Vance, but not the whole city. You're right. We need to head him off at the spirit line.
Yeah, but the line's fracturing already. It's like the veil was stitched back together after the invasion tore it open, that Calder and Velkos have been sneakily undoing the stitches one at a time. If the Wild Hunt makes it here, they'll trample us flat.
And if we repair the damage?
After we get rid of the Wild Hunt, and Calder, I shook my head. Then maybe nothing else will be able to come through, but I wouldn't count on it. What are the mages doing?
Arguing.
Angry lines creased his forehead.
Lady Granville wants to stay put. She thinks we shouldn't leave the manor unattended. I'd argue that it's immaterial, considering there's a threat to the whole town. Now we know where Calder is likely to strike, we should go there. And Colby showed up with Isabel.
Okay, I'll talk to her. I looked down at Lord Carlisle again. We should bring him back. Make sure nobody else can possess him. Vance gave a sharp nod and transported us back to the manor. It looked like every mage had showed up. A crowd had gathered around Lady Granville. Vance marched through, power crackling over his head.
Enough,
he said loudly.
Ivy has found out where Calder intends to strike. We face a danger greater than any since the invasion. Any mages who want to come with me and protect the town before an army tramples it, stand forward. Any who wish to stay here and defend the people, move there.
Expertly, he divided the crowd. Drake, meanwhile, stood in conversation with Isabel. Are you certain you know how to use the exterminator? She asked him.
Yep, point and shoot, and the ghost explodes. This is no laughing matter, said Lady Granville. Lord Colton, are you really abandoning us when— As Mage Lord, I'm taking care of the threat.
On her word. And mine, said Isabel. I found the spot, the Path of the Dead. The witches will form a boundary at the point where the path meets the main ley line, just in case.
And I'll set up one here, added Drake. Those hellhound bodies will attract trouble.
Good thinking, I said. I'd forgotten, stupidly, that hellhounds fed on death energy, and leaving dead ones lying around would most likely draw more of them here. Drake waved a hand, and fire immediately consumed the remaining hellhound corpses. Even the arguing mages stopped to stare as the flames climbed higher, then disappeared in an instant.
I'm not just a pretty face, said Drake.
We should move. I wasn't overly keen on leaving Lady Granville in charge of the remaining mages, but stopping Calder was paramount. Several black cars were parked at the roadside, and Vance took the wheel as I threw myself into the car beside him. Vance broke every traffic law into 100 pieces within seconds of hitting the engine. I hung onto the door for dear life as he one-handedly drove while displacing anything unlucky enough to get in our way, ranging from road blockades, discarded undead, and, once we reached the countryside, a runaway sheep. Don't you even think about lecturing Drake for breaking traffic regulations ever again, I yelped, grabbing the door as he turned into a country lane. I'd never been so far out of town on this side. Fields lay on either side, unkempt and overgrown with weeds, thorns, and in some cases, spiny fairy plants. Rain spattered the window as we drove. To make things even less pleasant for the end of the world, good old British weather had decided to chime in. Even from the car, the wavering lines of the veil appeared when I squinted. The lines overlapped here. The spirit path. The road of the dead. Spirits walked amongst the living.
There they are.
He stopped the car. A wet, bedraggled row of necromancers walked past. Draped between them was the body of Lord Evander. Was he sacrificed? I asked, rolling down the window. The necromancer at the front wore an expression so bleak, it looked like he'd witnessed the end of the world.
There was no necromantic equipment. Why was he even out here?
Because someone wanted to sacrifice him on the spirit path, I said. The paths are clouded, said a despondent female necromancer. We're finished. None of us can see the enemy.
Go to the mages, said Vance. They're setting up a boundary. We'll destroy this menace before it reaches town.
Look, I leaned out the window. Someone's using a ritual to summon a shit ton of hellhounds. A Faerie. We're going to stop them, but if they reach the town, we need every advantage possible. If ever there was a time for you guys to pull out all the stops, it's now. The necromancer nodded, as Vance kicked the car into gear again.
They're cowards, he said. We can't count on them.
No, but you can hardly blame them, I said. Necromancers aren't glory hunters. Some of them didn't want to be born with the gift. They aren't like mercs. They don't care about trophies or accolades. Mostly they want to stay alive. Considering how much time they spent close to death, I wouldn't fault them for that. We might well be joining them soon.
We're almost there,
said Vance. A rumbling crash, and the deafening sound of 1,000 hellhounds' footsteps tore through the air. Chapter 18. Hell. I turned to Vance. They're already here. Let me out of the car. Tires screeched and mud spattered the side window, mingling with the rain. I threw the door open and drew my sword, leaping out onto the roadside. Damp grass cushioned the impact as I slammed into a heavy body, swinging my blade. Blood gushed, thick and hot, and the hellhound collapsed. These weren't undead. They were the real thing. Rain soaked me through in seconds as I ran across the field. Maybe I could divert their attention from the town, but not when they were set on their path. I couldn't see a huge army, but the noise had been unmistakable. Vance appeared at my side in a whirl of rainwater.
I've told the others to stop and form a line here.
The hellhounds will knock you flat, I warned. There are 10,000, if we're to believe the Banshee.
I'm not inclined to believe she told the full truth, but we didn't come unprepared.
I turned back to the majors, where they'd already begun to assemble. A shimmering line gleamed in front of them. Anti-Faerie wards?
The best we have, Vance said. A lot of them. If the town's protections hold up, they'll avoid hitting the center and move through the uninhabited parts of town instead. They'll disappear as soon as they get to the ley line.
4 miles away, I pointed out. We're on the wrong side of town here. Anyway, is that where the necromancers are? The ones with Lord Evander will never make it back in time. You can't ward a 10-mile section of the English countryside.
Then we'll have to stall them ourselves.
Vance walked out behind me.
I trust you came up with a plan to stop Calder.
Kill him? Would help if I knew where he was. I looked ahead, through the rain, searching for the obvious sign of the key point he'd decided to use as his base. I couldn't do anything to protect all the mages. You keep an eye on the mages. I'll run on ahead, towards whatever Calder had done at the key point. Lord Evander was dead, but I was willing to bet that wasn't the half of it. A yell behind me made me spin around. Transparent figures had appeared beside the mages, easily outnumbering them. Ghosts. How did they get past the wards?
Only exterminators can kill them!
Vance's shout rang through my shock. And me! I yelled, throwing myself over the ward at the nearest ghost. My sword burst into blue fire, and the ghost screamed, impaled on the end. Flashes of elemental magic lit up the air in a clash of color and light, and my own attack rippled through several surrounding ghosts. I could kill them all, but I was willing to bet Calder was trying to divert my attention. I needed to undo whatever ritual he'd set up before a worse enemy appeared. The air shimmered, grey smoke seeping across my vision. Oh no. As the veil rose, thick and unforgiving, images burned the insides of my eyes. My last days on the world as it had been before. Running for my life, running from the Faeries and towards the prison of the grey veil. I swung my blade as if to physically cut away the images in my head. Another sound cut through the roar of battle. The thunderous sound of heavy footsteps. Or rather, paw steps. I ran through the thickening fog, leaping over the ward and sprinting down the field. I caught a glimpse of Vance tearing into a hellhound with claws and blade, and then I lost sight of him in lashing rain and blurred ground. The field halted abruptly, grey smoke forming a barrier before me. The thunderous racket came from right behind the smoke. Here, the three lines overlapped. I stood, bracing my legs, and fired magic right into the smoke. I was at a severe risk of getting trampled, but my magic would protect me, even against the dead. Calder stepped out of the air.
You won't stop them, Ivy. It's already too late.
You didn't think I'd sit back while you trampled the city flat, did you? I gave him a dismissive look. I don't care about you. I'm more concerned with whoever you wake up over the veil with your meddling. But that doesn't mean I won't kill you. I lunged at his ghostly form, magic flaring from my sword. As long as he had a physical presence in this realm, I could kill him, like I had the others. He dodged smoothly, wielding a sword of his own made of pure magic, blue and gleaming. Whatever it was, I was stronger. I recovered my balance as he ducked another attack. Calder's magic whipped at me. I caught the rope-like extension around my sword and pulled. A shock of coldness spasmed through me, telling me he'd attempted to freeze me, like last time. Hands grabbed me from behind. Another ghost. I kicked back, and the ghost made a low noise of pain. Ha! Now the veil was thinning, their physical forms were too strong for them to easily shift back and forth from death. I could use that to my advantage. My blade swung, decapitating the ghost. Its head floated oddly above its body, before my magic travelled through it, and the spirit shattered. I aimed to do the same to Calder, but he disappeared.
Unless you wish to be trampled before I can kill you, Ivy, I'd suggest you step aside.
Hell. I stood in the middle of the path, right in the way of the oncoming wild hunt. I ran, tackling Calder in a flying leap as he materialized to the left of the tangle of converging lines, where the smoke was thickest. A hellhound leaped out of the smoke, then another. They didn't see me. Their paws trod a path that imprinted itself on my eyelids, heading right for the mages. The barrier was positioned right, but if the wards weren't strong enough, or the ghosts overwhelmed them, they'd die. Pushing my fear for Vance aside, I stabbed Calder, and missed again. His magic latched onto my wrist, draining the warmth from my skin. I cursed and kicked him, but he went transparent again. Cowardly fucker, I hissed. You're nothing, you know that? No wonder Avocus disowned you. If you'd stayed, you'd have been a slave, lower than the weakest human. I needed him to take his physical form again, not in death. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to stab him. I had a theory, but the idea of crossing the veil here was less than appealing. Calder's magic pulled on my wrist, yanking me to my feet.
I've imagined killing you 1,000 times, Ivy. I know what you did in the Grey Veil. I know what you did to my father.
Velkas told you. My wrist burned where he grabbed me. My sword moved in a smooth diagonal slash, but he dodged again. Hindered by his magic gripping my arm, I was pulled after him. He grinned and flipped me over using magic as a rope, throwing me into the hellhound's path. Luckily, I was accustomed to landing on my feet. I let magic suffuse my whole body, and Calder hissed in a rage as his grip on my wrist broke. I jumped to meet a hellhound as it sprang at me, my blade cutting through its neck. Magic burned both sides of my sword, severing head from neck. Other hellhounds ran past, paying me no attention. They'd seen the mages. Oh, God. The mist cleared enough to reveal Vance standing ahead of the other mages. The hellhounds stopped dead as the air shifted, Vance's magic expertly manipulating the currents. I'd seen the level of control he had with that side of his ability. He'll be fine. Calder, of course, had disappeared when I'd cut the hellhound's throat. Damn it. I had to trust the mages to handle the oncoming hellhounds. Only I could kill Calder. I'm not walking into death to find you. I advanced towards the smoke. The tangled web of the 3 spirit lines made a dense black mass from which the hellhounds came. The lines went transparent, revealing a path I knew. The ground underneath my feet shone in the unnatural light. The path expanded to cover the part of the field I stood on, and rain no longer fell on my head. I'd walked into the grey veil without even knowing. The 3 realms overlapped here, merging into one another as the veil thinned and death spilled over into the mortal realm. Calder! I held my blade up. Come and face me! The deafening thunder of hellhounds drowned my reply. They ran along an adjacent path, but the part I stood on led to a small dip in the hillside. Wait. I squinted. No wonder my senses were confused. I somehow stood on 2 realms at the same time. Beneath my feet, the field and path alternated. I was on the cusp between the worlds, which meant the hole in the hillside. Oh no. I'd seen a very similar sight on the other side of town. Something's buried here. I ran forward, my steps drowned out by the clamour of the hellhounds, and the scene changed, warping around me until I stood outside a stone building shadowed by trees. Fairy glamour. Just like when the Lady of the Tree had used it. This was part of our world warped with fairy magic, overlapping with death and the grey veil at the point where 3 lines met. Calder wasn't responsible. Even as a superpowered ghost, he couldn't warp reality like the Lady of the Tree had. This place had been here a while. The decaying old trees housing the old building proved that. This place stank of neglect, and not in a human way. My skin itched all over, like old fairy magic. Old blood bathed every inch of me. I didn't want to see what was in the building. I kept walking anyway. No sign of Calder, and the path dead-ended at the squat stone shed-sized construction. Looked man-made, actually. Which made no sense here in fairy limbo. We were close enough to the mortal world that humans could theoretically have wandered over the veil, but the tang of dead magic in the air told me this place was human-proof. And here I was, walking right up to the doors. It wasn't a shed, but a tomb. Want me to bury you, Calder? I spoke aloud to cover the apprehension gnawing at my insides. Is that what this is about? I'd built a dungeon for the giant god in Faerie. This small building didn't house anything that size, but I held my sword high as I walked up to the door. Wards pressed against me, magic whispering over my skin. Not fairy wards or mage ones, but something else. Iron. The glamour peeled back, and I stopped, my heart jumping into my mouth. The stone of the building was laced with iron. Metal and stone melded into one another in a way that could only have been achieved with magic. Human magic. A humming sounded in my ears. Familiar. Fairy language. This place had been constructed by humans, but it was bound in the language of the She. That meant an invocation had been used. Words leaped to my tongue. I gritted my teeth together. What the hell, magic? Did it want to free the person inside? The taste was foul, like dead magic coated the inside of my mouth. Loathing. My human fear battled the magic suddenly at my fingertips. It didn't want to open the tomb. It wanted to destroy it. I was firmly on magic's side with this one, but curiosity stayed my hand. Whatever, lay buried here. My magic really hated them. Let me see. The wall turned transparent, like my thoughts willed it into existence. Inside lay an open coffin, human-sized. Human, or she. A body. A she-lord's body, perfectly preserved even from here, held upright against the back wall.
20 years he's lain here, whispered Calder's voice in my ear. 20 years since he was sealed away in the invasion. Velkas wouldn't be happy I woke him up, but you took care of that problem, Ivy Lane.
I couldn't speak. The eerily beautiful face staring through the glass-like transparency of the wall might have been carved out of rock. They didn't die. They never died. Someone had put him to sleep, presumably using an invocation. The only way to kill a she-lord was to use iron. This realm had no shortage of iron. The walls were made of it. So why leave him alive?
He's been sleeping for so long. It's time to wake up.
No, I croaked. Don't. You're a fool. No she would fight on your side, whoever he is. I spun to face Calder's floating body. Now was my chance. Magic crackled to life in my hands, the glyphs on my blade igniting, and I leaped at Calder. My sword speared him through the chest. I pulled on every spasm of anger, every scream of pain of those trapped behind the veil, stuck in this hellish limbo. But Calder remained, semi-transparent, not moving as my sword's light spread over his body.
You can't kill me with that, Calder sneered at me. Avocus's blood is my blood, and your new sword recognizes that. You can't kill me.
I can kill you in 100 ways. You're not that special. I did have an exterminator in my pocket, but he wasn't a regular ghost. And as a ghost, he wasn't even vulnerable to iron, which rendered the daggers in my pockets all but useless. What the hell, Magic? You were supposed to be on my side. A noise sounded behind me. A crackle of power from where my magic ran up against the iron covering the tomb. I'm not going to open that thing, I said. Forget it. If Death's gates are left open, there are some nasty gods back there who won't be happy you woke them up.
They're already open, said Calder. This place hasn't been seen since the invasion. This she has lived 1,000 years, and he holds the secrets to bringing me back to life.
What the hell was the deal with the hunt, then?
I need a body. The hunt will provide the energy needed to fuse my soul with his body.
He indicated the sleeping warrior. Even through here, I could make out the detail of the armor encasing him. He was a brute, bigger than any she-lord I'd seen, his huge muscular body barely contained by the glass coffin. You think you can walk in there without waking him up?
Without a body, I can cross all borders. He won't wake. Not before I claim his magic as mine.
You're unbelievable. I shook my head at him, aware of the agitated buzz of magic under my skin. You want to wake up someone who is put to sleep after the she destroyed the earth, so you can possess him. How do you know the leader of the hunt will let you steal his body? He and this guy might have been buddies before someone sealed him away in here.
This is no laughing matter.
I'm not laughing. My magic wasn't either. The biting sensation rubbed along my neck, like a nest of angry insects had decided to chew on me at once. What do you say we finish our battle first? If I win, you move on beyond and quit badgering the living. If you win, you get trampled by the hunt when they find out what you did.
I command the hunt myself, said Calder. Now I'll take this she's body as my own.
Not if I can help it. You're unhinged, Calder, and none of your plans have worked. Even sending a spirit to possess one of the mages. I drew the exterminator from my pocket and shot him in the face with it. The concentrated salt ought to have reduced him to ectoplasm, but it had no effect. Calder snarled and lunged at me. I sidestepped, cutting at him with my blade. He wasn't transparent any longer, and my blade sank into his ribs. I drove it in harder. If he was alive, he'd be bleeding out. As it was, he looked down at the sword like he hardly felt it. Okay, so I couldn't kill him with the sword or the necromancer's weapon. He was too solid, too close to returning to life. Calder raised his other hand, and I had to withdraw my sword and jump to avoid his attack. Magic lashed out at me, freezing the air in my lungs and stopping my breath. My numb hands tightened around the sword. This time, my physical body was here, and I wasn't fighting him as a spirit. I had to be able to win. In my hand, the exterminator shattered to pieces, like ice cracked with a hammer. "Worth a shot," I gasped. This was the kind of power crazed unseelie lords used to torture humans. Not strong enough to command an army of hellhounds, but enough to freeze my body and leave me powerless. A numb sensation started at the base of my left foot and began to creep up my leg. Calder smiled.
"I can freeze every cell in your body, one at a time."
"But you won't." I met his stare, not intimidated. "Because you don't have the patience. I think you'll be disappointed. Someone freezing to death isn't entertaining to watch." If I put weight on that leg, I'd fall over. Which, hell, might be entertaining. But he didn't want to mock me. He wanted to tear me to pieces in a performance for the entire Wild Hunt to watch. "Thought you wanted an audience." I jerked my head at the she-lord encased in the transparent coffin. "He doesn't look like he's paying attention."
"Someone is."
A ghost stepped out of the air, approaching Calder. He held the life-drinker sword. Chapter 19. The spirit handed over the sword to Calder, who took the life-drinker in both hands.
"Spirits can transgress boundaries."
A flicker of a smile passed over Calder's mouth.
"Humans can go where fairies cannot. You didn't think I only had half-blood ghosts on my side."
Human? The spirit? He was human. Tall, nondescript, and nobody I knew. Not a mage, or even a half-blood. His blonde hair was transparent, his tall, thin form wavering. But he'd managed to bring the life-drinker here. For Calder. "Why serve him?" I asked the spirit. As he turned to face me, I knew who he was. One of the necromancers who died after working with Velkas, when the necromancers had exposed his treachery. Vance had killed him. "More and more ghosts are slipping through the cracks," said the former necromancer. "We remained behind. More will follow. The necromancers knew they couldn't win. I knew it. I wish the others did too. Lord Evander wouldn't have died if he'd listened." "Aren't you the whiny idiot who was scared of dying?" I gave him a disdainful look. "You won't be laughing." The necromancer walked out of sight, disappearing in a flash. I swore.
"See?"
Calder held up the life-drinker. I'd fought against it before, but not in the hands of a ghost. So did he plan to bring himself back to life this way? "You lied. You don't need the hunt at all, do you?"
"I need an army. I'll give new bodies to my servants, too."
"How very considerate of you." I walked up to him, prepared for an attack. The sword wouldn't serve him until he won its allegiance from me. "You're nothing more than a wraith."
"Even the dead cannot die here."
A fist connected with my jaw, sending me sprawling. A booted foot kicked me in the ribs. I gasped in pain, though my brain sent warning signals to me that my enemies weren't physically present. No, these were ghosts. Hundreds of ghosts. A thick fog formed of human-shaped shadows writhed around me, smothering me, hiding even Calder from my sight.
"The grey veil awakens," said Calder's voice, from beyond the endless army of the dead.
They were human. The spirits I'd left behind in the grey veil. Avocus's prisoners. He'd staged the whole thing. This was exactly how Calder himself had died, when the drug I'd infected him with had dragged him out of his physical body and left him to the mercy of the ghosts of the people he'd killed, whose power he'd drawn on to feed his summoning circle. He'd fallen under their hands, and Vance had dealt the killing blow. So he wanted to kill me the same way. Whether his plan worked or not, whether the hunt trampled him flat or the She-Lord woke and took him apart, I'd never know. I was going to die before I found out. This was it. Calder had always said he wanted to make a big deal out of killing Vance before he killed me. Then again, expecting consistency from an unhinged ghost who wanted to awaken an army of the dead probably wasn't a good idea. "You're forgetting," I coughed. "I can't die here." Magic bathed me in blue light, healing my injuries in a second. I leaped to my feet, lifting my blade, ready to absorb all their fear, all their rage, if I had to. The spirits faded enough to reveal Calder, whose eyes were on the She-Lord imprisoned within the building in front of him.
"They don't forget, Ivy."
Calder walked past me towards the tomb.
"That's what's written on the doors. I never learned the She language, but Velkas taught me how to recognize it. This place is bound in an invocation. I can undo it."
"Stop!" I gasped, but at a gesture from Calder, the ghosts swarmed me again. Several held me pinned down. I squirmed desperately, fighting to get to Calder before he opened the tomb, but every ghost I knocked aside was replaced by another, like that damned Hydra. Calder, meanwhile, held the life drinker up to the tomb. Words came from his mouth, familiar and foreign all at once. The invocation. He knows the invocation. Not the one I'd used, but another. The glyphs on my own sword squirmed and writhed, and my tongue burned with unsaid words. Screw it. I'd take the chance.
"Don't even think about it."
Calder whirled and shot a blast of ice-cold magic at me. It passed through the ghosts, but froze my blood, pinning me to the spot. Pain blinded me, made the words slip from my tongue. Except one. The rune binding the tomb. A single word leaped through my head, disappearing as soon as I tried to recall it. The She didn't screw around. From my limited comprehension, they hadn't just sealed the Lord inside the tomb. They'd cast a strong forgetfulness spell over it, so nobody would ever find this place. The tomb opened with a further hum of magic, vibrating through my frozen skull. Ghostly hands pinned me down, others punching me with weak blows. Nausea rang through my head. I knew them. These were the kids who'd cried out for help when Avocus's castle collapsed. When I brought it crashing down. And yet, my attention was riveted on the tomb doors opening. Calder's ghostly form disappeared. The sword clanged to the ground.
"The words are in his memory," said Calder's voice. "He was Lord Fion, former leader of the hunt, and master of death."
Well, shit. 30 seconds passed while I fought the bonds. Scraping noises sounded. The coffin opening. Every warning I yelled was torn from my lungs before I could give voice to it. The relentless swarm of ghosts pressed down on me, coupled with the icy feeling spreading through my limbs. I scrambled to my front, in time to see the She-Lord stride out of the tomb and pick up the life drinker. From here, he looked like a giant, At least 6.5 feet tall, cloaked in armor that made him look even bigger. Not at all like too pretty Calder of Velkas. Calder's voice spoke through his mouth.
I wanted to watch you die, but freezing you will take too long. I have an army to claim. Don't die too soon.
Fuck you. Too late. He walked into the smoke and was gone. And he'd taken the sword. I cursed loudly, not caring when the spirit swarmed me and knocked me to my front again. Magic flowed over my skin, blue light encasing my sword. The spirits yowled and beat against me even more insistently. I was drawing on their anger. Oh, that's what pissed them off. But it wasn't like I could control where my magic drew its power from. Maybe I can. Look at me, I said to them. I'm human, still human. I took Avokis's power by total accident. I didn't mean to leave you behind. I can fix this. Come with me. The veil had opened the link between the 3 realms. This was a part of the Grey Veil, which meant I should be able to lead these lost spirits over into our realm, where they could pass into death beyond the gate. Assuming there was even a gate left. I let my magic die down to a trickle, even as cold still weighed down my limbs. The spirits faded a little, though they remained. Resentment, remorse, anger, despair. All those emotions lapped against me, and my magic pushed me, determined to react. I didn't let it. There was no enemy left in this realm, and I wouldn't turn on the spirits of people I'd unintentionally left here to suffer in limbo after death. Don't, I whispered to them. Calder is the enemy, not me. I promise to set you free. I sheathed my sword, raising my hands in surrender. My numb fingers fumbled, but I closed my eyes and pushed to my feet. My legs swayed a little, but some sensation came back. I stumbled over to the tomb. Nothing else remained inside. The iron-laced walls gleamed, shaped into runes. I squinted at them. I can read this. The rune gleamed, its meaning tripping onto my tongue. One word repeated over and over. Forget. Nobody knew this tomb existed because someone had used an invocation to erase it from memory. Not the necromancers, nor even the mages. Someone with she blood must have done it. The Faeries. The she-lords. Not the invaders, but the ones who'd stopped the war. Sure could use their help. But they couldn't have created the iron spell. Maybe the mages had. Or the necromancers. The same people who built the necromancers' headquarters had known. Magic ran through my veins, countering the numbness. I grasped as new warmth flowed to my fingertips, and the coldness disappeared. I turned to face the spirits. I'll set you free, I told the dead. The gates are opening. If you want to leave, come with me. You left us, hissed a boy no older than 13. Oh God. I'd been the same age when Avokis had taken me. But he'd been stuck here 20 years. A lump grew in my throat. I blinked tears from my eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You can be free, all of you. Promise. Faerie vow a nun. I meant what I said. The spirits floated before me, their whispers racing across my skin. She's lying. She's one of them. A fairy. I'm not a fairy, I told them. I took this. I indicated the sword. When I killed Avokis. Just like I'll destroy Calder. He wanted to use you against me. He's the son of the fairy who kidnapped you. We can finish him. I didn't know how many understood, or wanted to understand. Time was running out, leaving no chance to make a detailed argument. But several pairs of eyes met mine, and heads nodded in understanding. Calder might have brought an army, but I had one of my own. The pain and anger of those Avocus had held captive would never be satisfied. This time, we'd finish him. I ran over the vale, back into the field, to see a blackened sky descend over the world. That was no storm cloud, but an army in the sky. Hellhounds led by figures on horseback. Not ghosts, but horribly solid and loud. Bellows and angry voices assaulted my eardrums, while the braying of giant horses formed a thunderous backdrop. They'd come for him. Somehow, I doubted they'd stop to give him the benefit of the doubt for being a total moron. Nope, they'd mow the world down first. Great. Well, you've got your army, Calder, I muttered. The horde continued to descend. I ran towards them. I didn't have much choice. Beyond, the shimmering outline of the mage wards remained, but I couldn't see Vance. Please let him be okay. I'd brought him here. Everything came back to the day I'd escaped the Grey Veil and upset the balance by taking the magic of a she-lord. No, it's not my fault. I turned to the spirits. All of this is Avocus's doing. He's responsible. Now we're going to erase every lost trace of him. He'll be forgotten. You won't. Not by me. That much I could promise.
I beg to differ, Ivy, said a voice.
Chapter 20. I turned to the huge man who'd walked behind me, calmly watching the hellish march of the horses as though it was an entertaining display. Calder's voice didn't fit with the warrior he'd possessed. The guy was a fearsome specimen. Even with the heavy armor in the way, he was packed out with muscle, and yet surprisingly light on his feet. Metal-like bands encased his arms, plates covered his wide shoulders and chest, and his muscular thighs. He had his own sword, too, strapped to his waist, though the life-drinker didn't look out of place in his huge hands. Calder's voice sounded like it belonged to the teenager he really was. Or had been, when he'd still been alive.
Like my new body?
Not my type. I don't go for the resurrected from the dead sort, especially fairies. I'd never seen a fairy this rugged, I guess I'd say. His square jaw might have been carved out of rock, while his eyes were the most arresting shade of glassy blue I'd seen, like a deep pond in summer. His vacant expression, however, somewhat dulled the intimidating image. The real guy was asleep, and I hoped he'd never wake up.
You've lost, he said. The gates have opened across town. We destroyed all the boundaries. Your defenses weren't enough.
Nice try, but you lose. With the spirits at my back, I ran at him. A kick slammed into my ribs. Holy shit! He moved as fast as a pure fairy, and the weight of the kick sent me flying 5 feet into the air. I landed on my back, the wind knocked out of me. Ow. Possibly a broken rib or two. Magic encased my body in its glow, and the stabbing pain in my ribs disappeared. I leaped to my feet, my blade in my hand. Apparently, my healing power worked here on the cusp, now the worlds were colliding. I took in a breath. I'd clashed with a life-drinker before, and it damn near killed me. But I'd beaten the Lady of the Tree. Not a pure she-lord with "I am a badass" tattooed on his forehead, though. I swung at him. My blade glanced off his armor. I had the sinking feeling that I could stab him and he'd keep walking at me. The life-drinker fit into his hand like it belonged there. This guy had been on the same level as Avocus, as the other sadistic she-lords who wielded pure blades, and magic with the power to obliterate a city. Except the life-drinker was mine. I'd won its allegiance, and it wouldn't serve a new master. I cut diagonally, trying to wedge my sword through a gap in his armor. I'd need to take a hit or two to get at him, Of course, it'd be easier if I could figure out how to stop Calder from possessing him, but with the veil unstable, I'd have to risk it. I threw up a magical shield and plunged into death. My body detached so rapidly I didn't pass into grey smoke this time, but lunged out of my body towards the waiting She-Lord. As I'd hoped, Calder's spirit floated behind his eyes, not fully attached to the body. He hadn't managed to take control. If the veil was repaired, he'd be torn out of this body and sent back into death. But I couldn't count on it. Instead, I turned to the ghosts hiding out of sight. "Now's your chance," I told them. "Take him down." Then I lapsed back into my own body and swung my blade at his neck. The attack missed, but Calder stumbled back. The shapes of the spirits swarming him blurred my vision, and a strangled yell escaped as he fought to maintain control over the She-Lord's body. As for me, I braced myself and tackled him, kicking at the armor's gaps at the knee joints. We fell in a crash of armor, and my hands closed around the wrist that held the life drinker. I didn't think its power worked on ghosts, but if I had it in my hands, I'd stand a chance of closing the veil. Calder screamed. Ghosts were sent flying, and I had to fight to keep from jumping as several spirits passed through me at once, with a sensation like plunging into an icy lake. I couldn't break his grip on the sword. I let go with one hand to grab one of my iron weapons, and the she's body moved suddenly, flinging me aside. "I own this body." Calder sounded strangled, like someone was attacking him. Oh no. He'd woken the body's real owner, and given what I'd seen, he didn't look like the kind and gentle type. Now that gave a whole new dimension to having voices in one's head. A deep, unfamiliar voice came from his mouth, speaking in a language I didn't know. I braced myself for the impact, sure he was saying an invocation. But no magic surged through me. No. He was speaking the she tongue. Pure Faerie. Fluently. The man looked at me, frowning. Not Calder. Had the spineless idiot disappeared and left me to deal with explaining to a potentially murderous she-lord that I wasn't responsible for waking him up? Great. I mean, it was pretty obvious from the level of protection on the place that the guy was a villain, but I wouldn't be thrilled about being forcibly put into an endless sleep in a foreign country surrounded by poisonous iron either. Saying, "You're being possessed by a mad ghost and now I'm going to kill you," wasn't in me. Yet. Even if he was, in all likelihood, the death god the Banshee had warned us about.
Avakis.
I froze. "No," I said.
"Who are you?"
"Ivy Lane." Hell. So he spoke English. Then again, so had Avakis. These she had been involved with our realm long before the invasion.
"You're human."
I looked down at myself. "Really? I had no idea." "Great one, Ivy." Nobody had handed me a rulebook on how to deal with this situation. Based on my past experience with she-lords, they were unpredictable, capricious, and egotistical, and tortured humans for kicks. I wouldn't back down.
"Why is a human in the Grey Veil? You should be dead."
"You should be sleeping in your tomb." And I could think of only one way to get him back inside there. I'd done this before, but not in these circumstances. I had to trust my sword remembered the invocation I'd used on the dragon god, because I sure as hell didn't. The words had just come to me, like remembering something half forgotten. The sword itself carried their memory. But he held the life drinker. On instinct, I reached for the sword in his hand. With blindingly fast reflexes, the she-lord stood, the sword moving from my grasp. I willed the words to come, but they wouldn't. Hell.
"You woke me,"
he queried, head tilted on one side. He looked around at the greying surroundings. The veil had solidified into smoke, and I couldn't see the field any longer.
Why do you have Lord Avocus's magic?
Sorry to disappoint you, but I killed him. I raised my sword. Hand over that blade. Now. It's mine.
This.
He looked at the life drinker.
Is he here?
Velkas? Nobody's here but you and I, and a bunch of angry spirits. One of them wants to possess your body. That's why he woke you up. I couldn't speak Faerie. Not like there was anywhere to get lessons, even if I wanted to. And I had a feeling invocations weren't the usual Faerie tongue. The closest were the runes carved into the tomb. Forget. I opened my mouth. The first syllable rushed past my tongue before the she-lord raised a hand, and my throat closed up. I gasped, choking on my own breath. What the hell? I stumbled back, further into the smoke as he advanced on me. Oh God. A tongue-tying spell. I'd never had one used on me before, but I'd seen the effects. He knew Avocus. He knew the lords who destroyed our world. No, he was one of them. Chapter 21. The scene changed abruptly. We stood on a castle's stone balcony, looking down onto dense forest. The castle had a similar design to the one I'd been imprisoned in, a fortress of turreted, reinforced stone, towering above the thickly growing trees below.
Would you look at that?
He smiled around at the dizzying drop below the parapet.
I'd forgotten the magic of this realm.
A faint glow encased his hands. What magic did he have? As a she, it came as no surprise that he could manipulate the fairy realm, but then so could I. I'd freed the spirits. But where in the hell was Calder? Not like I could ask. The tongue-tying spell was one of the most powerful, and from the mouth of a she. I had the sinking feeling only he could undo it. Hell. I glared at him instead, putting every ounce of fury I possessed into my expression. If looks could kill, he'd have burst into flames. As it was, he laughed.
I can guess how you overcame Avocus. You have trickery written all over you.
I gave him the finger and threw a dagger with my other hand. I'd aimed for the center of his forehead, as surely as hitting a target. The dagger, however, glanced off an invisible shield and clattered on the ground. Damn. Iron was my sure bet to kill him, but maybe my sword would do. I summoned up all of Avocus's power, and the runes on my sword glowed. The choking sensation disappeared from my throat as I pointed the sword at him. I meant it when I said I wasn't a normal human. He blinked in disbelief. Somehow even that looked badass. If I couldn't use an invocation on him, how else to get rid of him? More to the point, where had Calder's ghost gone? Had he been left behind? My new problem stared me in the face, turning the life drinker over in his hand. Hand over the sword, I told him. My own blade pointed at his neck, though I'd be seriously challenged to land a hit on him through all that armor. Luckily, I still had my magic. It had killed one she-lord when I didn't truly understand how to use its power. I couldn't afford to stay my hand because this guy wasn't the enemy I'd expected to face. He and his people had taken away everything I cared about. Hell, it might have even been him who killed my parents, or caused the invasion in the first place. His dark blue eyes stared into mine.
What would a human want with the life drinker?
I won that sword, I said. Its allegiance is mine. He turned the slim, green-handled blade over, lightly tossing it from one hand to the other.
That explains it.
And he threw the sword back to me. My reflexes kicked in and I caught the hilt in my left hand. That's it. I'd expected more of a fight.
You won the sword yourself. Taking it from you would expend too much of my power, but I'm very curious as to how you won it.
His voice glided across my skin like an ice-cold fingertip on the back of my neck. I suppressed a shudder. Some of my shock receded, giving way to good old-fashioned fear. He was too calm, too controlled. Based on my experience with the she, that meant he was about to start breaking things. I won it fair and square. I killed its owner twice over. Who are you?
Lord Fionn,
said the man.
Leader of the Wild Hunt, until I broke the rules.
He smiled slightly, tilting his head to the sky.
I thought I heard my hellhounds. Did you wake them, along with the life drinker?
No. An egotistical half-fairy ghost called Calder did. Avocus's son.
Ah, family rivalry.
He looked down at me. Not hard, because he was a freaking giant.
You don't look like him.
That's because I'm not his relation. I'm human.
His lover.
Ew, no. He captured a bunch of humans when you and your friends decided to trample our city into the dirt. I outsmarted him and stole his magic. He threw back his head and laughed.
I slept through that.
He spoke several words in the fairy tongue.
You killed him. You're awfully young.
Thanks. Ugh.
Young. Human. Breakable.
His huge hand reached out. I stabbed my sword through it. The sword burst through the other side in a frisson of blue light. Momentarily, a startled expression flashed through his eyes. Then he laughed. Loudly. He stood there, his hand busted open and mangled, and laughed. I wanted to back away, but I didn't. Are you done?
Humans have changed in the intervening years,
he mused, shaking his head at me.
The ones I trampled were the best you had to offer. It seemed an awful waste, but my fellow lords were very particular about leaving evidence behind.
They're the ones who left you in that tomb. The place had been built of iron, but who else could have overcome a lord on his level of power? He looked at me sharply. The skin on his hand knotted back together, splintered bones reforming and mashing into one another. I looked away, tasting bile. In a whirl of light, his hand was whole again, and his fingers beckoned to me.
I seem to be missing part of my memory, human. Perhaps you and I can get comfortable, and you can fill me in on what I missed.
Name's Ivy, and I'm not interested in you. I have a ghost to catch. Whoever he was, he'd been dangerous enough to put to sleep once already. I had 2 swords. He had 1, and he'd been sleeping in an iron prison for at least 20 years. He surely mustn't be at full power. I didn't have time for another all-out brawl, not with the hunt gaining on the city. The she's hand grabbed for mine. I swung my sword up, intending to cut him again. He dodged, baring unnaturally white teeth at me in a grin.
You wish to steal my power too, human?
I want you to go back to sleep and leave me alone.
I'm intrigued. You stole Avocus's magic, and his talisman. Does that mean you truly understand its power? I somehow doubt it. Avocus wielded the talisman before you even came into existence, human. You could live in Faerie for a century and never come close to understanding us.
I could say the same to you. You don't understand humans at all. We survive. I survived, and the magic chose me. Maybe he was right. I knew nothing of Faerie and its customs. Even when I spoke the invocation, it felt more like the magic was acting through me using my voice. But I'd earned the magic fairly. Both talismans. I'd used them to close the veil already. I'd do it again. He moved blindingly fast, drawing his own blade in the time it took me to blink. I raised both swords at the same time, blocking him. Green light from the life drinker mingled with blue light from my own sword, creating an aura of power that should have forced him back a step, or 10. He glanced down like a cat contemplating a mouse sitting in front of it. Oh, hell. His own blade glowed blue-white. He's from winter. He could use a tongue-tying spell. But what was his ability? Sure would have helped to know what could counter 2 talismans at the same time. Maybe it was just his natural strength as a pure she-lord. I gritted my teeth and pushed back, the thrum of magic from both swords making my whole body shake. I earned these talismans. I'm not budging. Fionn held his own sword casually, like he wasn't even trying. I pushed back, but barely gained an inch. Pain shot through my ribs. I glanced down. Through the blurring light of the swords, I saw my own dagger sticking out of me. He must have picked it up when I dropped it. I gasped. Blood drenched my middle. He twisted the knife, and I screamed. He has some kind of kinetic ability. My shoulders and arms burned with the strain of keeping both swords upright. Blue light encased me, fighting against the dagger twisting under my ribs. The world went hazy.
That's better,
he said.
So you do have accelerated healing. The magic did choose you. I wonder.
I cried out as the pain shattered the shield I'd been attempting to maintain. My magic was trying to heal me, but he kept driving the knife in deeper. One movement, and it had hit something vital. My shield pushed back. So did the dagger. Come on. I let the swords drop and fell back, willing my magic to work. The dagger escaped in a rush of pain, swiftly extinguished. He reached and caught it in mid-air, as though pulling on invisible strings. I coughed, willing my body to heal. He was freakishly strong, far more so than the Lady of the Tree. She hadn't been her talisman's equal. He'd dwarfed 2 of mine. Avocus's power fed on death, but hadn't been enough, which left one option. I tapped into the life drinker, which glowed brightly green.
None of that,
Fionn said.
I've had enough of being imprisoned. I think I'll take back what is mine.
He shouted in the fairy tongue. I watched him, feeling the last threads of pain fade away as my magic worked. Then came the sound of hooves and thundering footsteps. He'd called the hunt. The sky exploded. Hounds descended in a barking mass of shadowy fur, and amongst them rode black-clad figures in armor. I took a step back. I needed to get him away, back into the tomb. But the tomb wasn't here. We were in Faerie for real. He'd made this castle and stuck me on top of it. His laughter followed me as he circled the parapet. A horse rode up to us, huge, black and fearsome. Fionn walked to me, a wide grin stretching his face. Don't you dare. Too late. He easily climbed past me and pulled me after him. A scream jammed my throat as he dragged me onto the horse, into the wild hunt. Chapter 22. I fought with magic and body alike, but the horse lurched into the air, carrying me along with the screaming crowd. It was like being caught in a mosh pit, except with medieval-clad figures riding frightening black steeds and accompanied by dogs as big as the horses. I gritted my teeth, clinging onto both swords and gripping the horse's neck with my thighs. I didn't have much choice. Falling wouldn't crush me. It'd land me in a hellhound's giant mouth, or have me impaled on one of the long, javelin-like swords carried by the horsemen. I wasn't sure my swords would even work up here, because these hellhounds weren't quite dead or alive. "Put me down!" I screamed at Fionn, who'd settled behind me like he did this every day. I spun around, but couldn't get the right angle to stab him from here. Cursing under my breath, I switched my blade to the same hand that held the life drinker, and used my free one to search my pockets for one of Isabel's explosive spells. The spell glanced off his perfect face. I snarled and grabbed my blade again, so it pointed backwards, and leaned to strike him. The blade missed, and I damn near dropped it. We were flying high, above the field where the mages continued to battle the hellhounds. I leaned over, desperately searching for Vance, but the layer of hellhounds below prevented me from seeing anything other than huge, snarling beasts. Above, the sky boiled an angry reddish-black over the town. I hoped the wards would hold up. It didn't look good for the mages on the ground.
"Extraordinary view, isn't it?" said Fionn. "I wouldn't look for your friends, Ivy. They're dead."
"Screw you," I said. "You have no idea what's happening here, so don't bother pretending."
"It looks as though someone angered my hounds. Are those your allies down there? Is that—"
He paused.
"Well now, I suppose that answers my question about whether the mages survived."
"Oh, they did. Were you the one who killed them?"
"Personally? Maybe. I did tell you I'm missing parts of my memory. Perhaps they can oblige."
"Vance, if you go within a meter of them, I'll claim that sword of yours and feed it to you." He laughed. I drove my foot back into his knee, but the heel of my boot bounced off his armor. "The hell do you even want?" I snarled at him. "You've been dead for 20 years. There's nothing left for you."
"I have everything to gain now, Ivy. The Lords of the Grey Vale, the ones who destroyed your world, never died. They're just waiting to be awoken."
I figured. My heart sank at the confirmation of my worst fear. "You lost once already. I wouldn't screw with our realm."
"Your people were the ones who lost the war," said Fionn. "Even the mages couldn't contain my magic. That is, if there was anything left of them in the end."
He gave a short laugh, edged with malice. Oh God. Had he been the one to kill the original mage lords 20 years ago? Vance's parents too? "You bastard!" He laughed again.
"So you do have an attachment to them?"
"You're lying, aren't you?" I twisted to face him. "Unless your memory's not as defective as you pretended."
"You caught me."
He grinned. The horse's monstrous body shifted as he spread his arms to indicate the view below.
"This isn't an empire, is it? Humans are fractured, cowards hiding behind a council of liars. Did the mages rise again? If humanity survives and prospers without reverting to barbarism, I would assume they did. The people never were good at self-governing. I remember that much." "You don't know shit," I said. "You might live longer than us, but we rebuilt a whole civilization in the time it took you to have a nap." "And yet you die so easily."
He pointed with the sword. Burning cold seared my shoulder as he aimed an attack at the mages on the ground. Cursing, I leaned forward and fired a bolt of magical energy at his attack. Too late. Fionn's magic had already slammed through the horses onto the ground below. The mage's wards glowed bright, and still held. I breathed out. Behind me, Fionn laughed. "Proved your point yet?"
"My opinion was unpopular,"
said Fionn.
"But I always thought Avocus squandered his power, holing up in that hideous old castle, feeding on humans. You know, He once ruled a quarter of Winter's territory. How the mighty rise, and how they fall into dust. 1,000 earthen empires pass in the blink of an eye, and all that's left is this.
How very philosophical. Don't touch anyone in this realm again. I twisted to glare at him.
I can take the magic away from you. Take away your misery, so you can join your human kin in watching the end walk up to your door.
Watch you trample everyone I care about. In your dreams, asshole. Forget it. I'll kill you first.
Your life is in my hands, Ivy.
He kicked the horse's side. I fired a volley of curses at him, my stomach rising into my throat as we descended in a sharp drop. The other horsemen followed. The riders of the apocalypse were here, and I was the one who'd brought them to our realm. We touched down on the ground. Immediately, I swung my leg over the side and launched myself at the she-lord, but he raised a hand and I stumbled, repelled by an invisible wall. One of the riders stopped, wheeling his horse round to face me. His visor lifted.
Ivy Lane, there you are.
Calder? He'd got another body? This really wasn't my day. Understatement of the bloody century. How to kill him this time? Calder, or the rider, remained on his horse, watching me warily. Oh, he was scared of the unpredictable she-lord behind me, not of me. You can't keep that body, I said. Sooner or later you'll run out of power and you'll be dragged back to death.
Maybe I'll give him a body,
said Fionn. Don't you dare, I warned. He was trying to steal your body in the first place. Calder raised a hand, and a whipcord of icy energy struck at me. I threw myself sideways behind Fionn's horse. The attack ought to have struck Fionn, but instead ricocheted off an invisible shield. I landed in a forward roll, the wet grass slowing the impact. I jumped to my feet and swung my magic-bright blade at Calder as he leaped down from his own horse, landing in a clatter of heavy armor. 2 other armor-clad fairy knights climbed from their horses to join him.
I did promise the half-bloods their own bodies, said Calder. Now I can keep my word.
Hell. Fionn had power over life and death. He could give any of these mad spirits their own body. I needed to be rid of Fionn, otherwise killing Calder wouldn't permanently get rid of him. Problem was, my sword couldn't kill him. The life drinker, which fed on life, wouldn't either. I'd have to physically drag him out of his body and throw him through the gates, when the whole of death was in turmoil. The Vale was a mess, and a she-lord of the dead waited to get in my way. Calder threw magic at me again. I raised the twin swords and his attack bounced off. I let my own rage feed into the blade, hoping to find some anger from the surrounding horse-riding hunters as well. My sword glowed bright, but I didn't feel anything from the hunters. Maybe they were immune to Avocus's magic. Just what I needed. Give up, I told Calder. Leave this realm. You're dead.
I own this body. I should never have died.
His magic whipped at me again, while the rest of the hunt continued to ride on towards the mages. Fionn still watched, but he'd obviously given his hounds permission to wreak havoc. And with Calder in my way, I couldn't stop them. Killing the body he possessed wouldn't finish him off, which put an end to my other plan. Logically, going after Fionn would have more of a result, but the invocation hadn't worked. Wait. The words on the tomb. Forget. I'd tried to use it on Fionn. He was immune, but Calder wasn't, and nor were his allies. Magic shot over my head. I ducked on instinct, whirling to repel an assault from Calder's magic. He moved fast, even with the heavy armor encasing his new body, but his movements were hesitant enough that I knew his coordination wasn't totally on the mark. I swung my blade hard, driving it into the hilt of his own sword. He dropped it, cursing. Ha! Fionn applauded behind me. I ignored him. Before Calder picked up his sword, I'd lunged and kicked it away under his horse's hooves. Calder snarled and threw a whipcord of blue energy at me again. I raised the twin swords to block, readying a magical assault of my own. Another half-fairy intercepted me, my returning attack bouncing off his thick armor. The other two half-fairies closed in. I blocked another 2 hits, forced to back towards Calder. Boxed in between armored fairies possessed by the dead, who were entirely unaffected by my sword. Despite my obvious disadvantage, I moved fluidly, blocking every half-fairy's attack. But now they possessed solid bodies, it took more energy to fend them off. My arms ached, not fueled by Faerie anymore. I was only stalling for time. A half-fairy kicked me with a booted foot. Pain shot up my leg, leaving me open for a kick to the ribs from another. A half-fairy lifted me into the air by the shoulders, while the fairy Calder possessed marched forward and punched me in the jaw. Ow! Mad fury burned in his eyes. He'd imagined doing this to me 100 times, making me pay for what I'd done to him. My arms screamed in pain as I tried to wriggle free from the other fairy's death grip on my arms. Even my swords were unreachable. Icy cold shot down my spine before I called my magic. So cold. Calder delivered a punch to my solar plexus, which drove the breath from my lungs and overwhelmed my senses. My body shook, icy coldness penetrating every inch of me. I'd set the spirits free, but nobody remained to take on Calder. The hunt rode on towards the mages. Calder and his buddies had all the time in the world to beat me, in front of our audience of one, Fionn. He stood in front of me, grinning, a row of hellhounds preventing me from making a break for it. Anger surged inside me, magic flaring from every pore. I couldn't drain the life or energy from these fairies to power my swords. But the magic was in me, and I was stronger. I gritted my teeth and kicked Calder, but not hard enough. He wore armor. I didn't. Even magic wouldn't break him. But a hellhound's teeth would. Gathering all the remaining energy, I threw magic over his head, slamming into a row of hellhounds. Fionn's defense line. He might have given them orders, but the hellhounds reacted instantly to the attack, swarming forward and breaking formation. Calder looked over his shoulder, swiftly moving aside as the hellhounds ran at me, teeth biting and tearing. I heard Fionn shout in order, but too late. I threw up a magical shield between me and the hounds. I had seconds to work my spell before Fionn stopped me again. Not this time. I screamed the word, felt my throat tear, and Calder reeled sideways. So did the ghosts. Forget. The word rang through me, and I gripped the vibrating swords in both hands. Forget. The invocation burned in my blood, tasted like metal on my tongue. My breath came out in sharp gasps. The pain threatened to tear me loose from my body, but I stood my ground. I can't die. I can't. I blinked, and I was outside my body. Oh, shit. Calder frowned at me. He, too, stood outside the body he'd been possessing, a blank expression on his face. In death. Like me. Calder? I said uncertainly. Did it work? He stared, eyes open, bewilderment etched on his every feature. Slowly he turned on the spot, peering through the smoke. Then he looked back at me. No anger. No malice. Just confusion. Where am I? Oh God. It worked. I'd erased his memory. Someone will explain, I told him. Do you remember who you are? No, I don't. Do I know you? I closed my eyes, willing myself to fall out of death and back into my body.
Not anymore.
Chapter 23. Fion's laughter greeted me. I tilted my head. I must have fallen to the ground when I'd crossed over, and Fion had moved to my side. My magical barrier repelling the hellhounds had gone. Fion seemed to be able to stride through any barrier anyway. Nobody else was around. We must be in the Between Realm, the path of the dead.
That was interesting,
said Fion.
A very nice piece of improvisation from you, Ivy.
I sat up, wincing. I'd only disappeared for a few seconds. Very lucky Fion hadn't decided to kill me when I'd blacked out, though maybe my magic would have protected me. Maybe. It didn't work on you. Why?
I told you. I'm awake now. You can't put me down that way.
He grinned at me. Creepy bastard.
I'm a Lord of the Grey Vale. As for you...
He paused.
I would like to offer you the chance to join me. You have the talismans of 2 she-lords, so you're more than qualified.
Absolutely not.
Your friends are dead, Ivy. You've nothing left here.
No, they aren't. Swallowing my fear, I reached over my shoulder and tapped the mage mark.
It's too late, Ivy,
said Fion.
Your friends are already in death. Whatever Calder did to the Vale dragged the living over. The wards are down. Your mage friends are effectively dead.
You're lying. Vance couldn't be dead.
I can guess what occurred while I was gone, said Fion. Did the mages claim power over all humans, like they said they would?
He spoke to them? You talked to them? His mouth tilted up in a smirk.
What would you give me in return for that information? You're no mage yourself, but you have a special relationship with them. They wouldn't fight on your side otherwise. The mages do nothing for free.
You don't know them.
Maybe I do.
His smirk grew more pronounced.
Would you offer me a favor in exchange? I know things about the mages that would doubtless shock you, if you're really their ally.
I'm not interested. Nothing was worth risking another bargain with a she-lord.
I wouldn't bind you. You're equal to a she-lord like myself, so you can choose to be on my side or against me.
I gave him my best attempt at an angry mercenary stare, under the circumstances. I'd rather be on anyone's side but yours. He laughed.
You may live yet to regret that decision.
Oh, I will. Any reason the invocation didn't work on you? What makes you so special? I'd put a god to sleep. He couldn't be more powerful than that dragon, surely. Don't they work on all fairies? He laughed.
Surely you've worked out by now that I'm far from ordinary. I can melt the skin from your bones without the need to invoke our ancient tongue.
Don't count on it. My magic seethed in protest. It wanted nothing more than to rip his face off.
You know nothing of our language, nothing of what it means to be one of us. If you want to understand, my invitation is still open.
I opened my mouth to speak the invocation, and my throat closed up. I gasped, trying to force out the words, but the tongue-tying spell held me captive. Fion swung himself onto his horse and winked at me.
Until next time, Ivy.
The hounds trampled out of sight, leaving me alone on the road of the dead. Death floated all around me. Spirits from the grey veil brushed past. The hunt had gone, and already the spirits had begun to fade, drawn towards wherever beyond was. As for me, I followed, leaving my body behind. Fion might be a liar, but I'd never risk Vance's life. If he was here in death, I had to bring him back. Oh God, please don't let it be too late. I drifted in the direction every spirit seemed to be moving in, as though pulled by an unseen force. Whether the veil was mending itself or not, I couldn't tell. I continued to drift, past confused-looking humans and blank-faced half-fairies. It looked like my spell had hit every half-blood who'd been possessing Fion's army. Others must have been out of range, because they fought against the force pulling at them, hurling curses into the wind. For all the good it did. Their magic had disappeared as the realms had separated, and every one of them was drawn towards a gate. Transparent and endless, it seemed the only solid object in this place, between here and whatever lay beyond. Spirits drifted through the gap where the gate lay open, and on either side were rows of necromancers. Lord Evander and Frank stood beside the gates on the right-hand side, watching the spirits drift past. Lord Evander's eyes locked with mine as I drifted over. "Sorry you're dead," I said to Lord Evander.
"You aren't,"
he said. I had no time or energy to argue, so I turned to Frank instead. "Where's—"
"You're still alive," said Frank. "I'd advise you to return to your body. The veil is likely to experience a shift when this number of dead cross over. What did you do?"
"Erased Calder and his allies' memories, but the Mage Lord is here, in death." I looked desperately amongst the ghosts, but there were too many transparent figures overlapping. What the hell are the living necromancers doing in all this?
"There'll be a new leader," said Frank. "But the old ways will change. I would strongly advise opening the guild to allow qualified professionals the use of their equipment in vanquishing the dead."
Lord Evander turned on him. "We haven't discussed this yet."
"There's no time. The veil's prime for the taking now."
"Thanks for being a voice of reason," I said. "I'll suggest it to the Mage Council, if they're still around."
"We'll take care of the dead."
Good. Calder was gone. The spirits who'd been trapped in the ruins of Evocus's castle would finally be free. But I'd failed. I'd let a she-lord get away. And Vance. I spotted him amongst the endless pack of spirits. So this was Calder's final act. He'd dragged Vance into death and left him there. Unless he'd killed him for real. "Vance!" I shouted. He looked back at me. No recognition showed on his face. Shit. Please tell me my invocation didn't hit him too.
"Sarah?"
he said, his brow furrowing, as I moved in front of him, barring the way to the gates. "No, I'm Ivy. You're not dead. We have to go home."
"I have to find her."
"She isn't here." His distant expression tore at my heart. Maybe his family really were beyond the gate somewhere. I hadn't wiped his memory, but this was classic ghost behavior. They fixated on the distant past, on loved ones they'd lost, and if they spent too long here, there'd be no going back, which was doubtless Fion's plan. Nice try, you scheming bastard. "Come with me." I took Vance's hand in mine. It barely felt solid, but I clutched it tighter, tugging on the little connection we had. He looked down at our interlinked hands, wearing a frown.
"Do I know you?"
"You know me. You love me. I love you too, Vance, and I'm going to stand here and hold on to you until you remember. Sarah's dead, and I'm sorry. But you're alive, and so am I." My tears spilled over. "Please, please come with me, Vance. Trust me." He took one step closer to me, and I pulled him with me as the endless flock of spirits faded away. I blinked awake. I lay beside the old tomb in the between realm, my hands clenched around the two swords. From the absence of pain, my healing power had kicked in while I'd been in death. On the other hand, I was bloody freezing. I groaned, staggering to my feet. Vance must be with the other mages. I hope. I checked the tomb. No signs of disturbance. Except for the missing she-lord. You fucked up, Ivy, I murmured. The silence was palpable. No one, living or dead, lurked here now. But at least I'd freed the spirits caught in Avocus's trap. That was one small victory. I turned my back on the tomb and began walking. Grey smoke blurred around me. Then I stood on the field again. My feet trod through the dead grass, mixed with mud and fresh blood. Hellhound, mostly. The blue tinge of Faerie blood shone unnaturally bright under the dim sunlight streaming between the clouds. The mages were huddled behind their wards. Nobody had dismantled them yet. Guess they wanted to make sure the hellhounds didn't come back. Several were injured, but the lights of healing spells burned through the gloom. I stopped when I saw him, apart from the others. Vance lay still, and the sight brought me to my knees in the dirt, my face damp with rain and tears. I leaned over and squeezed his hand. It was cold as death. His eyes opened. Do you remember me?
I remember,
he said slowly.
I think you told me you loved me, but I might have imagined that part.
Oh. Yeah. No, you didn't imagine it.
Good.
He took my hands. His were as cold as ice, but then so were mine.
Thank you for bringing me back.
Any time. I leaned over and kissed him on the mouth. I also mean it when I say I'm freezing my ass off here. Vance sat up, groaning a little. I slid an arm around his back, and he half leaned on me as he got to his feet. We limped over to the other mages. Drake looked at us, his eyes dull and glassy.
Blasted rain.
He shook water from his hair.
Is it over?
Yeah. I nodded, my head throbbing at the movement. It's over. We can go home. Chapter 24. Vance drove us back, slower this time. A healing spell took care of my various bruises, while I told Vance everything. He didn't stop to ask questions, only listened. The other mages didn't talk much either. The shock was visible everywhere, and all the worse because when we got back, we'd have to face the consequences of the council turning on one another, and one of them being possessed by a half-fairy ghost. I pulled out my phone to check Isabel was okay. Apparently, she and a handful of necromancers had joined the mages who'd wanted to fight in exterminating any ghosts they came across. They'd been lucky. The majority of the army hadn't made it past the mage wards to the town. There was no army anymore. Calder had gone, his supporters had passed beyond the veil, and the spell I'd used had let nobody slip through the cracks. Except one very significant somebody.
Are you all right?
Vance watched me in the wing mirror, a worried frown on his face. I forced a nod, though we both knew things weren't so straightforward. What's going to happen to Lord Carlisle? I asked.
He'll be removed from the council, for certain. We'll have to determine whether or not he was acting on his own volition.
I don't think he was, I said. The spirit, it used some kind of glamour on him. I killed it.
Good, said Vance. But the fact remains, he took the sword from our stores. An outside influence was able to slip past our wards and commit murder on our doorstep. The council won't let that drop, as it should be. But it leaves me with the choice between condemning an innocent man and giving the message to outsiders that we forgive transgressions, like Ralph's murder.
To who? The necromancers? They didn't see. I didn't tell Lord Evander, anyway. I doubt anyone outside the mages knew, and the ghost's memories were completely wiped out. No one knows. His expression remained dark.
Perhaps not. But every mage will know. Word will spread. I have to make the right decision, otherwise we'll see worse than a leadership challenge. The necromancers are already without a leader in a time when they sorely need one.
Yeah, it's a mess. And I'm responsible for it. There's a she-lord out there who wants me on his team. If he attacks, it's my fault.
That isn't true.
Vance took one hand off the wheel to rest it on my knee.
You aren't to blame. Calder is.
Avocus, I said. He's where this all goes back to. His magic started everything. He and this Theon were rivals. They didn't like each other at all. He could have challenged me there and then, taken both talismans and destroyed the town. I wouldn't have been strong enough to stop him. His hand squeezed my knee.
We'll deal with that when it comes to it.
Yeah. I smothered a sigh. I screwed it all up this time.
We stopped a hellhound army overrunning the city.
There is that. I looked out the window. Where's the nice she when you need them? You'd think they'd have noticed I woke one of them up. I'm lost on who put Theon there in the first place.
You said his prison was made of iron,
said Vance. Yeah. I'd say that rules out the she, but they can cross iron boundaries under certain circumstances, like the ones with talismans. I can't see a human having the power to put a she under an invocation.
Maybe humans and she cooperated.
Sure would help now, I said.
Yes,
said Vance.
But according to that necromancer, the she exiled their gods to the Grey Vale. I doubt they'll have forgotten so easily.
They didn't notice when I bound the god in the Grey Vale?
No, they did not. But I think the manner of the invasion is less simple than the she would have us believe. For them to intervene when mankind was at war, and to turn a blind eye when a god awakened.
Shit. Good point. They don't know I exist, so they couldn't have known I'd handle the god myself. I mean, it was awake for about 5 minutes, if that. But they can travel through the realms whenever they like. It's been months. This is no different, I guess.
They don't care for humans,
said Vance.
Even in the war, the losses were mere collateral damage to the she who left our world to ruin.
I think the memories of the people who actually witnessed what caused the invasion were erased, I said. That's why the rune was on the tomb. They forgot. Someone made them forget. The she. Vance gave me a sideways look.
I suspected that might be the case.
What? Really? You never said?
I wasn't certain. We have no records of the invasion, but the words of the she, and until today they haven't been seen in this realm. If other she from the Grey Vale were actively involved aside from Avocus, and nobody has ever heard of the Grey Vale, not even the half-fairies, it suggests the information was taken away.
Fair point, I said. The she send their exiles to a place where they can't get at Faerie, but they can get at our realm. Seems a glaring loophole.
I intend to speak to the chief, said Vance. He might know of this Theon, and where he might have come from. The hunt is well known, isn't it?
Yeah, but I was under the impression it ran ahead even without a leader. I paused. Actually, I first heard of the wild hunt in the Grey Vale, from someone who'd been there a while. Theon was sealed away the same year Avocus took me. Maybe the hunt's been gone the whole time, waiting for Theon to wake up. I shook my head. Those fairies. They weren't she, except for Theon, but they were immune to my magic. I'm not sure if they were living or dead. Vance paused before answering.
I didn't see them myself, but if they can cross easily between life and death and the Grey Vale, perhaps there is something that gives them an immunity to your power.
Because my power's from there too? I shrugged, feeling more tired than ever. Actually, I know one person who knew the wild hunt was coming. The Banshee.
Yes,
said Vance.
We'll deal with her later.
She knew Calder, I said. Well, some of her friends did. If we want to find out if he knew any other fairies in the Grey Vale, it seems a sensible idea to keep our enemies close at hand.
You're right, but I won't be lowering the defences on the manor. It's time I took care of our discrepancies on the council, too.
How do you plan to do that?
You'll see.
His tone had an undercurrent of decisive anger that made me pause. He didn't plan to dissolve his own council now, so soon after the battle, right? We pulled up outside the manor. The road was half flooded with rainwater, mingling with salt and dismantled wards. Mages hovered in dejected-looking packs, and immediately converged on the car. "Mage Lord!" shouted a dozen voices at once.
"The threat is taken care of."
Vance spoke over them in a magically amplified voice. Another crowd had gathered further down the road. My heart sank at the sight of Lady Granville standing over a prone Lord Carlisle, trapped in a circle of wards.
"What did you do?"
Vance demanded, walking over with his coat streaming behind him. He was a traitor, was he not? Lady Granville didn't look worse for wear. By the look of things, she'd even used a rain-repelling spell. Anger chased away the weariness dragging at my limbs. I was through with her crap. Technically, he was possessed, I told her. Ask if he was in league with the spirit. I'd guess not. There's no advantage to a mage working with the half-fairy ghosts. There's no need to kill him. Vance said,
"I will question him myself. I'd suggest that all of us take precautions against spirits, but there's no need to ban an innocent man from our guild."
Innocent? Lady Granville arched an eyebrow. He stole from our stores. He didn't know about the ghost, I countered. He denied any knowledge, said Lady Granville. But words are cheap, and his were not the actions of an innocent man. Fairies can use glamour and tricks, even dead ones. Damn her! I'd done my best to keep the mages alive, and it looked like they'd tear themselves apart anyway. None of this is your business, Ivy Lane, said Lady Granville. Mage Lord, you know our reputation is at stake here. There's chaos in the streets. The necromancers are without a leader, and their people are responsible for this catastrophe in the first place. Actually, I corrected, the person responsible is the she-lord I killed 20 years ago. His son's ghost is gone, and so is the army he summoned. Thanks to Vance and me, no mages were killed. And if they had been?
If I had hesitated, more would have died, said Vance. In diverging from my orders, you might have cost us the city. As it was, Ivy was responsible for taking care of the threat. You kept Lord Carlisle's treachery from me. I will question him myself, but many wiser humans have been fooled by the she. If he turns out to be innocent, there will be no punishment. People have died, Lord Colton. I will not accept this. She turned to the other mages, as though seeking a show of support. Most seemed too shocked to comment. So be it, said Vance. Do you challenge me for leadership, Lady Granville? Oh, no. I vaguely remembered Vance telling me the East Midlands division of mages settled a dispute after one of their mage lords had been murdered by staging a duel between the two contenders for leadership. If you win, I step aside, Vance said. Lose, and you will no longer be welcome to serve on my council. I think it's best we settle this as quickly as possible before we lose face, as that seems to be your major concern. Whoa. Lady Granville raised a brow again. If that's the only language you speak... I bit the inside of my cheek to stop from intervening. This was Vance's fight, though damn if it wasn't tempting to yank her off her high horse. The time for diplomacy has long gone, said Vance. Quite apart from the fact that we've lost a council member and an ally, and the necromancers have fractured, your decisions might easily have cost more lives. I won't stand for it. He threw his coat aside, eliciting a gasp from the surrounding mages. Wait, he planned to do this now? Vance... Too late. The mages cleared the way through to the manor's gates,
and moved in a pack down the stone footpath through the hedges to the lawn at the front. Vance walked onto the lawn himself, while the other mages gathered on the sides. "You have got to be shitting me," I muttered. A duel. A freaking duel. It seemed absurd that someone like Lady Granville would elect to settle issues with a bout of magical combat, but this was more my language. I hoped Vance knew what he was doing. He just fought a grueling battle against the hellhounds and taken a trip into death with no rest in between. Without his coat, the difference between him and Lady Granville was even more pronounced. Usually Vance embodied control and order. Now, covered in blood with his shirt torn and his shoes muddy, hair curling into his eyes from the rain, he looked like he'd walked out of a riot. But then so did the rest of us. We'd gone to war, and we'd been lucky enough to come back in one piece. Lady Granville might not have a hair out of place, but if the decision had been up to her, the town would have been levelled. Maybe if you'd managed to stop Theon awakening. I shut the thought off. You couldn't change the past. I'd come to terms with that a long time ago. "In 3, Drake said from the side. The fire mage looked pretty bedraggled, too, his coppery hair drenched. 2, 1. Lady Granville and Vance watched one another, neither betraying whether they'd attack first. I detected a tense simmer in the air, but Vance would have to show some restraint. And no other weapons than magic, because this was a mage duel, which meant no swords. Knowing Vance, he wanted a fair fight. The ground trembled underfoot. Lady Granville was an earth mage. I supposed she could probably tear the earth up here, and the mages would put it back to normal within 5 minutes. The ground shifted, then rose in a wave of wet mud to attack Vance. He immediately conjured a shield, displacing the air to knock the soil aside before it struck him. The earth swirled around him like a whirlpool. I frowned. He might be tired after the battle, but he could move faster than that. Had he suppressed his shifter instincts to fight as a true equal? Usually he exploded into action faster than I could blink, but that brought out his claws and scales. Doubtless he wanted to prove a point to Lady Granville and fight without them. "Fools," growled a voice from behind me. I turned, as a figure marched up beside me, leaning heavily on a cane. Lady Harper. Both her hands rested on the top of her cane, which was carved into the shape of a dragon's head. "They're fools, the pair of them. I'm told this is how you handle things." I wasn't in the mood to argue with her. "Where were you during the fighting?" "Building wards, in case the Mage Lord's actions put the city at the center of an attack." "Vance went out to protect the city, rather than holing up here," I muttered, taking a few steps back so the others couldn't hear us. Vance had disappeared underneath a torrent of earth, and I hoped it was part of his plan. "What about Lord Carlisle? A fairy spirit slipped by your wards. Even Vance couldn't have known."
"Did he ever tell you what happened to the last leader of the Mage Lords?" asked Lady Harper, as we reached a gap in the crowd. She beckoned me onto the path between 2 hedges. Curiosity fought wariness, but I'd be more than ready to retaliate if she used her ability on me again. I hesitated. "No, it's never come up." "He was Lord Carlisle's brother," said Lady Harper.
My breath caught. "Oh. I know Vance killed him."
"There was a particularly nasty case of undead last year, and a rogue necromancer let things get out of hand."
Lady Harper sniffed disapprovingly.
"Lord Carlisle's brother was possessed, caught in their spell, and Vance was forced to subdue him. Unfortunately, he fought back, lost control of his powers, and almost killed Vance in the process. The veil tipped him over the edge, and he was halfway through a killing spree before Vance cornered and killed him. As a mercy."
Ouch.
He hoped the same wouldn't happen to Lord Carlisle. That's why he's fighting to keep his position.
Seems a hell of a weird way to go about it. I side-eyed her. Even you've got to admit that. A public duel to decide the future of the council.
Yes, I suppose it is.
You fought a she-lord, didn't you? How'd you know that? Vance didn't say.
He didn't need to. A human couldn't have drawn the hounds away.
Don't be so certain. You don't understand my magic.
I understand enough.
Don't tell me to stay away from him, I said sharply. I've fought a dozen times for the mages. I've done as much to protect the town as Vance has.
In the time since he took the leadership position, there's been an increase in Faerie attacks, disputes with the necromancers, and multiple incidents resulting in near catastrophe for both this town and this realm.
Because we're sitting on top of the ley line, I said. That's why we're a target. I frowned at her. Are you really not surprised? Or do you know something else? She made a disparaging noise.
After all the years I've lived, Ivy, nothing surprises me.
I didn't know where to begin with that, so I turned back to the fight. Vance gestured, and the swirling curtain of earth lashed outwards, knocking Lady Granville off her feet. Ha! Before she could return the attack, Vance had Lady Granville pinned down under her own earth spell. Nicely done.
Do you surrender?
She looked at him calmly from behind the circle of earthen walls trapping her. Yes. I had to hand it to her for showing class in her defeat. Vance's eyes roved over the crowd.
The new council will be elected on the 15th of the month. That will give us time to clean up the city. You can leave now.
The mages dispersed, gradually. I gave Vance a look, projecting, I need to talk to you alone. Leaving Lady Harper behind, I picked my way across the ruined lawn to him. Was that necessary? I asked Vance.
It worked.
He snapped a spell into place, and the scattered pieces of earth dispersed, the patches of grass falling back into the right place. Of course it did. You got to reassert your badassery over everyone. I paused. Lady Harper knows something about the She-Lords. I'm sure. She doesn't seem surprised at all. He frowned.
I'll speak to her later. The new council and I need to come to a decision on how to handle the situation at hand.
Right. The new council. You've got all that figured out? Aren't the elections soon?
Don't worry, he said. I've secured my position. The mage lords I appoint will have a difficult job, but we're used to dealing with—
Ivy! Isabel's voice yelled from outside the gates. Your wards won't let me in! Oops. I ran across the grass to the footpath, where Isabel stood on the other side of the gate. I opened it and hugged her. You okay? Yeah. Are you? I nodded. Guess I am. Colby the necromancer hovered behind her. Can we take the salt away now? He asked Vance. People are complaining to the guild because they can't drive on the main road. Vance sighed.
Yes, you can remove the road blockades. I'd advise everybody to take the usual precautions, but the immediate threat is taken care of.
You're the mage lord. Colby's mouth fell open. I thought you were someone else. Ha! Actually, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen Vance look more of a mess than I did.
I am, said Vance. I'd strongly advise you nominate a new leader as soon as possible. The new Mage Council will be on hand to assist in the process, if you so desire.
I'd vote for Colby over Lord Evander, I said in an undertone as the necromancer nodded and left. Maybe they need someone who's easily swayed, so they won't get in our way.
I've no doubt Lord Evander will prove just as much a hindrance as a ghost, said Vance.
Yeah, you're probably right. I turned back to the manor. Are you kicking out Lady Granville,
She won't serve on the council. The manor will be ours again shortly.
Ours. I'm not on the council. I'm barely an honorary witch, considering I don't have a license, and I'm not a witch. Or a mage, come to that.
I'll come up with a new title,
Vance said.
As long as I'm Mage Lord, you'll have a place here, and I don't plan on giving up the position anytime soon.
And if Fionn comes back?
We'll take him down.
All right. I'll believe you. Until the next bad guy comes along. I looked past the ruined lawn at the road beyond, already cleared of the evidence of the battle. What a pair we make. Vance wrapped an arm around me.
I'll be here, whatever choice you make.
I hugged him back. I wouldn't have it any other way. This has been an Audible Studios production of Faerie Wrath, The Changeling Chronicles, Book 4. Written by Emma L. Adams. Performed by Lucy Christian. Executive producer, Mike Charzek. Copyright 2016 by Emma L. Adams. Production copyright 2017 by Audible Inc. Audible Studios is a division of Audible Inc. If you enjoyed this audiobook, be sure to get more books in the Changeling Chronicles series today.